I had been depressed since my wife left me. At the time, she was working long hours at the law firm where she had ambitions to be a partner. I worked from home writing content for a digital marketing agency. I had thought that everything was fine, and then she told me out of the blue that she had met someone new, someone with drive and ambition. I had those things. I told her I just needed a break. But her mind was made up, and by the end of that horrible day, she had moved out of our apartment and taken her things with her. I was devastated. She had been the one, the love of my life. For the first few dreadful weeks after that, I kept expecting her to message me and tell me that it had all been a mistake. But my phone was silent as I sat staring at the television with the curtains drawn. I lived off junk food, stopped showering, and wrote email blasts without really seeing the words that I was typing. Weeks drifted into months. I never went out anymore. I ordered everything that I needed online. One Saturday morning, I dragged myself out of bed late and looked around listlessly at the dirty clothes strewn across the floor. The remains of my midnight snacks were scattered among them. It was disgusting, and I didn't care. I leaned over to find something to put on and saw a rustle of movement among the mess. It was a rat, and it was looking right at me. I swore and stumbled backwards. My feet got tangled in clothes, and I fell. The rat just watched me freaking out and then ambled away as if it hadn't a care in the world. I sat there, my heart beating way too fast, and decided that things had to change. I was like a man possessed. I cleaned myself and the apartment from top to bottom. I filled 24 refuse sacks with empty takeaway boxes. I mopped and vacuumed the floors. I scrubbed the sinks and the work surfaces. And I even threw away some clothes that had gotten mold on them and were beyond washing. The rest I laundered and ironed and folded. Now, I had snapped out of my downer. I could not believe how disgusting that I had let things get. Feeling a lot better already, I left the apartment and went to the Whole Foods store and stocked up on ingredients for healthy meals. After a bowl of organic porridge, I turned to my laptop. While I was on a roll, the next thing that I wanted to do was meet someone. I typed in a search for online dating, and I hit a problem. After sifting out the sites that struck me as dubious because they immediately wanted my credit card details and other frankly seedy websites, I made a start by filling in my personal details on one of the genuine portals for singles like me. This was simple enough at first. In some ways, it wasn't that different to applying for a job. When it came to interests, I had to embellish things a bit. My hobbies had been eating junk food while staring blankly at the television and missing my wife, but I couldn't enter that in the relative boxes, and so I wrote that I enjoyed fine dining and classic movies instead. These still felt a bit weak, but I could always go back and improve them, and besides, this was just the first of a number of sites that I was going to use to get myself back out there. My personal profile almost completed, I clicked on next, and that's when things went astray. The website wanted me to upload images of myself, but the only images that it would accept were ones that were already on my social media sites. Social media was not somewhere that I wanted to be. There were lots of pictures of me and my ex-wife. I knew that seeing any of these would open up old wounds. And much worse than that, I might see what my ex-wife was doing now. While I was wallowing, she would have been posting about her new life, her new love. Feeling sick, I went to close the website, and without adding any images, a pop-up message appeared asking, "Are you sure you want to leave the site? You won't be able to find romance." Feeling a horrible mix of anger and depression, I exited the site. I tried another 3 similar sites, but always reached a point where I was reminded of the past that I was trying to leave behind. Online dating was a nightmare, and there was no way that I could deal with it. My shoulders slumped. The pizzerias that I used to order from on a daily basis would be open. An app on my phone could see a 3-cheese stuffed crust mega meal heading my way with a couple of taps. The thought of gorging myself was so tempting, but I knew that if I succumbed, it would be a bad backward step. I decided that was not going to happen. I closed the laptop, and for the first time in my life, I went for a run. I didn't have any running gear to change into, I just set off in the clothes that I was wearing. I made it to the end of the block before I ground to a halt with my hands on my knees, gasping for breath. I was fine with that, it was still a win. Once I had caught my breath, I decided to go for a leisurely stroll rather than heading straight back to my apartment. I passed a row of independent shops. One of them was for donated goods that were sold for charity. A sign in the window read, "Volunteers wanted." That gave me an idea. Back at home, I opened my laptop up and typed in a search for voluntary work. I figured this would be a great way to meet someone new, with the added bonus of doing something helpful. I didn't see myself standing behind the counter in a shop, but there would be something out there that was right for me. The pages of links came up, and after making myself a coffee with low-fat milk and no sugar, I began to work my way through them. There were many deserving causes that appealed, and I sent off for more details about voluntary roles helping out an animal charity, cleaning up a park in the city center, and working on a community garden. I was about to call it a day when my eye was caught by a search result at the bottom of the page. It read, "Help save our fire tower." Now, I had heard of fire towers, but I had never seen one in real life. I was pretty sure they were a thing of the past, made redundant by modern technology, but I was intrigued enough to click the link. It took me to a website of a group who had bought an old fire tower. The tower had been closed down 40 years ago and left to fall into disrepair. The group wanted to renovate it and open it up as a tourist attraction. They were looking for people who could spend time at the fire tower working on the fixes. It sounded great, and I sent them my details. I hoped they would get back to me straight away, when after a salad with wholemeal bread, I still hadn't heard back from them. I decided to fill time that evening by doing a bit of my own research. The group's site said the fire tower was located in a rural area on the outskirts of my home city. I typed in the location and went to an online image showing the fire tower from above. The fire tower itself showed as a speck in the middle of the forest. Presumably, it had been the forest that had been monitored for signs of a fire back in the day. On the city side of the forest, the trees eventually thinned out and the grounds of large houses began to dominate the landscape. I wasn't interested in seeing swimming pools, tennis courts, and helipads, so I moved the view away from the city out over the fire tower and deeper into the forest. The treetops spread across my screen in a beautiful display of nature, and then the image blurred. All I could make out were vague shapes. Assuming the problem was my laptop, I cleared my cache and turned it on and off again, which was as far as my technological know-how stretched. None of this helped though. The image was still blurred. And so I moved the view 10 miles along and the details returned. I could see open countryside, a farm, and what could have been a tractor. I kept looking in all directions and soon realized there was nothing wrong with my laptop or the internet. Instead, bizarrely, there was an area of land which was not showing. If I had been into conspiracy theories, I would have thought that it had been censored. That for some disturbing reason, ordinary people like me were not allowed to see what was down there. I yawned and rubbed my face. Somehow it was almost midnight. I had lost myself down a rabbit hole and was thinking strange thoughts. I smiled wildly to myself. This was definitely another sign that I needed to get out more. I closed the tabs on my computer, ending up with just my emails, and was pleased to see that I had a reply from the administrator at the fire tower group. It said that the group would be delighted for me to join them on site renovating the fire tower, and added that they were holding a social event at a city center bar on Sunday evening. I'd be welcome to come along and meet some of the members of the group. I replied that that sounded fantastic and that I would see them there. That night, I slept better than I had in what felt like a very long time. The following evening, in my now orderly bedroom, I chose a fashionable casual shirt and a pair of slacks. I gave my smartest shoes a polish and put some gel in my hair. And that was me ready to go to the bar and meet up with the fire tower group. As I sat in the subway, I must admit my stomach was churning with nerves. I was so out of practice with socializing, and this mattered to me. Telling myself that it was going to be fine, I watched the stops go by. The bar was just around the corner from the subway station. It was pretty much empty apart from a group of people sitting around a table in the corner, which I figured must be the fire tower folk who had come along for the social event. Hoping that I could remember how to have an actual conversation with people in real life rather than on screen, I strolled over. It turned out that I had nothing to worry about. The members of the fire tower group were welcoming and chatty. They were a mixed bunch. One of them, Mike, was a retired firefighter, though he was quick to point out that he had spent his career at the inner city station and had never been near a fire tower professionally. There was an accountant, Jeff, who also handled the admin for the group as a registered voluntary organization. An Alan who worked in PR and another Alan who worked in retail. There were a couple of university students, Tony and Nick, and there was Beth. Beth was about my age and worked as a nurse. She had long dark hair and an infectious laugh. And as the evening progressed, all I wanted to do was talk to her. At one point, I was trying to tell her a story about something funny that had happened to me when I was a teenager, but I totally muddled up the story and ended up sitting there silently wishing that I had never opened up my mouth in the first place. Beth put her hand on my arm and said simply, "It's going to be okay." I think she could tell that I had been going through a bad time and I had to fight against opening up to her about my marriage ending. As socially awkward as I was, even I knew that was a guaranteed way to put somebody that I had just met off liking me. I hoped, though, that one day soon I would be able to talk to Beth about the things that really mattered to me. I was feeling a strange mixture of uncomfortable and happy when Jeff said that he wanted to run through the rota for the following weekend's visit to the fire tower. He and one of the Allens had been due to go along and spend the Saturday there. Unfortunately, neither of them could make it now, and he asked if anybody else was available. Beth leaned over to me and said quietly, "How about you? We can spend time working on the tower and get to know each other better." Heat spread through my cheeks, and I grinned and replied, "Yeah, sounds good to me." Beth raised her hand and told the group that we would be happy to step in. I spent the subway ride home in a happy daze. I had already met somebody that I really liked, who seemed to feel the same way about me. Back home, I was smiling as I fell asleep. The rest of the week passed far too slowly. I wrote copy for products that I thought were garbage and ignored messages from the bosses at the agency saying that they wanted all staff to start working from the office for at least 3 days a week. Not if I can help it, I thought, and created a folder called Job Search. Beth had given me her number in the bar, and I also kept starting to write messages to her, and then deleting them because they were far too long and far too eager. Play it cool, I told myself. And then a few hours later, I started composing another wordy text, which I deleted. Finally, Saturday morning arrived. I had hired a car for the drive out to the fire tower. After writing and deleting a dozen messages to Beth asking if I could have a lift, followed by a rambling explanation of why this would be great, I set off extra early to make sure that I wasn't late. Reaching the fire tower, I parked up in its shadow. Craning my neck to look up, I was impressed. It was a simple and sturdy, appearing wooden construction with legs that reached high into the sky, supporting an observation deck. A ladder was the only way to reach the deck. The ladder did not look as sturdy as the rest of the fire tower, and the thought of climbing it filled me with unease. But I had to, or else what would Beth think of me? I took a deep breath and tried to compose myself before she arrived. Wondering if she had sent a message with her ETA, I checked my phone, but I had nothing. So I could either wait for Beth to get there, or I could overcome my fears in private and climb up to the deck. If I chose the latter, it wouldn't matter then how much I was grimacing or turning pale. I could be in the fire tower, appearing all confident and cool when Beth rocked up. I could tell her that the climb was a piece of cake. A decision made. I put a foot on the bottom rung and grabbed the sides and began to climb. The first half a dozen rungs were easy, and then I started to breathe harder and my muscles began to ache and sweat trickled down my face. My new diet had done wonders for me in recent days, but it hadn't wiped out months of being a slob. I was very unfit and not ready for this climb, but I was not going to turn back now. Thinking about Beth, how we had talked and had a good time, it spurred me on. Soon, sharp pains were flickering in my chest and my hands were so sweaty, I was worried about losing my grip. I paused, tightened my fingers around a rung and made a big mistake. I looked down. The ground loomed below so far away. I felt dizzy, felt the world around me begin to spin. I was going to fall, I was sure of it. I closed my eyes and gripped the ladder even tighter, and then dredging up enough willpower, I started ascending again. I kept my eyes closed and I felt my way, rung by endless rung upwards until my hand struck an obstruction. I opened my eyes and looked up. The base of the observation deck was inches away, and there was some kind of hatch blocking my way. If it was locked, I would have no choice but to go back down. A prospect my exhausted limbs and stretched taut nerves couldn't face. I pushed, and to my relief, the hatch opened. Almost there, I thought, and I clambered upwards, and at last, I was through the hatch. I scrambled forwards on all fours and lay there on the floor of the deck, spread-eagled, gasping for breath and laughing to myself all at the same time. I was so glad that Beth was not here to see this and so proud of myself. I had made it, the all-action hero in a fire tower. Feeling shaky with the exertion, I got to my feet and I looked around. There was a lock on the hatch which could only be engaged from above. The floor of the deck appeared to me to be pretty secure. There was also a wooden safety barrier which ran around the edge of the whole deck and came up to my chest. Broken up wood, possibly once chairs and a table from when the fire tower was in active service, was piled in one corner. A roof which was supported by narrow pillars would give shelter, provided the wind and the rain were straight down, otherwise the deck was exposed to the elements. Thankfully, it was a fine summer's day, bright and clear, and I could see for miles. I turned in a circle to take the view in. My mouth was probably hanging open in awe, but I didn't care. The trees stretched out for miles in every direction. I was above the canopy and could make out patches of open ground between the nearby trees. Trying to remember the online view that I had seen, I worked out that the large houses would be to the south. I couldn't see any of them but expected that their rich owners would be in their home gyms or their home cinemas on a Saturday. The area that had been mysteriously blurred out would be to the north. I made a mental note to ask Beth if she knew what that was all about when she got there. Soon, I hope too. This was the most beautiful view that I had ever seen in my life, and I wanted to share it with her. I wanted to tell her how happy I was to be there and how lovely she was. She might even look up at me and place a hand on my arm and then move in closer. We would kiss. I smiled as my phone pinged with an incoming message. It was from Beth. Hey, the hospital called. I need to go into day to cover for a sick colleague, so I'm not going to make it out to the fire tower. I'm really sorry. I stared at the screen and sighed. So much for spending time with Beth and so much for my dreams of us kissing. I put my head in my hands and muttered, "Loser," and sat down. I rested my back against the barrier and stared up at the roof. Was it too much to ask, wanting to share my life with someone? The answer was a definite yes. I closed my eyes and hugged myself. Startled awake, shivered, I realized that I had fallen asleep and been dragged back into awareness by the sound of my phone ringing. I rubbed my face and looked at the screen. It was Beth calling. I answered with a hoarse, "Hey." "Hey you," she replied. "I'm on my lunch break and I'm just calling to ask if you got the emergency alert. The authorities are telling everybody to stay indoors in an area that takes in the fire tower. They're saying it's a suspected chemical leak." If I got the alert, I had slept through it. No, I grunted, still groggy. "But you're on the road, right? Heading away from the fire tower?" she asked. I climbed to my feet. To be honest, no. I was shattered from climbing the ladder and then got your message and well. I was about to tell her how receiving her message had made me feel, how I had feelings for her, but something had caught my attention. A thick spiral of dark smoke was rising into the sky in the distance over to the north. "Are you still there?" Beth's voice broke back through. "Yeah," I answered. "It's just I'm still at the fire tower up in the observation deck and I think I can see the source of the incident. There looks to have been some sort of accident over where the online map was blurred." It occurred to me that I should explain what I meant by this, but she was way ahead of me. "Oh, Spookyville," she exclaimed. "Tony and Nick are convinced there's a secret military facility over that way. I'm not so sure, but you should get down from the fire tower and get away." I looked over the edge of the barrier all the way back down to the ground. Maybe I'd be better off staying here," I said, thinking out loud. "If there's a chemical leak, it could be safer to be higher." "I'm not sure." Beth began, but once again my attention was caught by something else. I could see a figure on the ground stumbling in between the trees. I couldn't see them clearly because of the distance. But whoever it was, whatever was going on, they weren't out for a stroll in the woods. They were running away from something. I was convinced of it. I told Beth, "There's something strange going on here. I'm going to hang up now and get a quick film and I'll send it to you." I disconnected before she got past saying the first couple of letters of my name. I was buzzing because Beth had cared about me enough to call, and I knew that we would be going for a drink to talk about the strange events at the fire tower really soon. Me and Beth as an item were very much back on the agenda. I held the phone up to catch the plume of smoke and then held it over the edge of the barrier to film the stranger on the ground, and I noticed that they weren't alone. There were 3, no 4 figures weaving their way along the forest floor. I held the phone out further, tried to click the focus and proved that I was a loser after all. I dropped the phone, watched it tumble down through the air. I lost sight of it in seconds, but it must have landed near one of the figures on the ground, because they stopped in their tracks and looked up, right at me. I stared in their direction as they moved towards the base of the ladder and began to climb it, which wasn't a problem, I told myself. Oh, what's that saying? Safety in numbers, yeah, that was it. And the other figures were following the first up the ladder. Maybe they had decided that being up in the fire tower could be safer. I had been thinking about that very thing moments earlier. Only now, for reasons that I could not explain, I did not feel safe at all. I felt exposed, alone, and afraid. I went over to the open hatch and peered down. The leading figure was climbing much quicker than I had. They had already made it halfway up, which made me think they must not be suffering any ill effects from whatever had made them flee. But as I focused on them, I could see their clothes were dirty and their hair and skin. Their hands looked filthy as they grabbed rung after rung. My guts tightened another notch. I looked at the cover for the hatch. I thought about closing it and snapping the lock into place, but I couldn't do that. This man, I could see that it was a man now, was clearly not all right. Now that he was closer, I could make out that his skin was more than dirty. It was damaged. Open wounds were visible on the top of his hands. I definitely had to help him, not keep him away. Him and the others, below him I could see the other figures frantically ascending the ladder. There weren't just 3 or 4 others now. There must have been around 10 of them. And the man who had first stepped onto the ladder was now only a dozen rungs away by now. He hadn't looked up yet, hadn't called out. He was just getting closer and closer. Close enough in a moment for me to reach down and grab his arm and help him up. "Hey, you're almost there," I called down. "Almost safe." I wanted to reassure him because that was the right thing to do, but I could hear the fear in my own voice. And instead of offering my hand, I looked down the hatch at the top of the man's head, saw that there were things moving on his scalp. Maggots, I realized. What is wrong with you?" I asked, my voice shaking. His only reply was to look up. Revulsion rushed through me. His face was a vision of terror. Wounds glistened on his forehead and cheeks. Flaps of gray skin hung down from the edge of the hideously damaged flesh. Part of his upper and lower lips were missing completely, and I could see the teeth beneath fixed in a horrifying grimace. One of his eyes shone darkly as he looked at me. The other was a hollow pit. Bile rose into the back of my mouth. My legs felt like they were about to give way. I was face to face with a nightmare, and its hands were about to grip the sides of the hatch. In seconds, it would be on to the observation deck, followed by the others. I managed to break through the terror which had started to rob me of all sense and strength, and I slammed the hatch down with my foot, fell to my knees, and snapped the lock into place. The hatch began to shake as the thing began to strike it. A sickening growling sound rose up towards me as well. It sounded like a rabid animal. More distorted, feral voices were raised in protest, and the hatch rattled violently. As long as it holds, I'm safe, I thought, and began to pace the observation deck, desperately looking for another way down. But there was no escape from the horror enveloping me. More figures were streaming through the forest, and I could no longer see the base of the ladder because it was covered in a writhing, growling mass of the things. Still, more came and tried to drag themselves up and over the bodies of their grotesque kin. They moved with a blind rage, and in a flash, I understood what the creatures were. They were zombies, dead and crazed and trying to get to me. I shuddered as I thought what they would do if they got their hands on me. I glanced back at the hatch. Despite everything, it was still holding. I still had a chance. And then I saw some of the zombies were no longer trying to get onto the ladder. They were clambering up the legs of the fire tower, some falling in their frenzy, but others clinging on and crawling along the wood, getting closer and closer. A scream grew inside me as a ravaged hand appeared on top of the barrier, as a zombie rose into view. It glared at me, its eyes were bloodshot pools of anger. A low, furious growl drifted from its lips. Its face was whole, but as it mounted the barrier, I saw that its gut was an open wound. The gray slime of its intestines were revealed as it lowered itself onto the observation deck and began to stagger towards me. I backed away and almost fell over the broken up furniture. There was nowhere else to go, and if I couldn't flee, then I had to fight. I picked up a chair leg, let loose the scream, and ran at the zombie. and rammed the fragment of wood into its eye. The zombie cried out, staggered backwards, and then toppled to the floor and lay there motionless. Death had finally truly claimed it. I felt a rush of relief, a short-lived burst of hope that everything was going to be okay. And then I saw a second zombie was on the verge of scaling the barrier. I picked up another piece of wood, braced myself for the next attack. The zombie raised its arms and growled, and out of nowhere a sharp sound filled the air. The zombie collapsed on its face. Fresh blood decorated the back of its shattered head. More sharp sounds followed. The sounds of weapons being discharged, I realized, and lay flat as I could on the deck. It seemed the cavalry had arrived, and I didn't want to end up as a casualty by accident. For what felt like a long time, the torrent continued. It was deafening, apocalyptic. But when it finally ceased, the hatch was no longer rattling, and there were no more zombies scrambling over the barrier. I crawled forward onto my belly and chanced to look over the barrier. The ground between the trees was covered in the remains of zombies. Soldiers were picking them up one at a time and throwing them into the back of trucks. Cleanup time, I figured. I kept low and I kept quiet. I was going to wait until the military had finished clearing up the mess that presumably had originated in the secret facility, and then head back down the ladder and hope that nobody had shot my hire car. The soldiers worked rapidly as what must have been NCOs barked orders at them, and soon the trucks were starting to pull away until there was just one Jeep left, and 2 soldiers taking the final boxes. I didn't care about cover-ups by this point. I had survived, and at the end of the day, that was all that mattered. And though it did not look like I was going to be able to sneak away, one of the soldiers was looking through the window of the hire car. Another was pointing up at the deck. Ah well, I thought, don't sweat the details. All they would find up here was an innocent citizen and the remains of 3 zombies. A thought trickled through my brain. I had killed 1 zombie with the chair leg. The soldiers had taken out a second zombie. I turned slowly as the 3rd zombie growled and lifted its head. I hadn't seen it make it onto the deck during the firing, and it must have had enough sense left in its corrupted brain to lie low. A dead man playing dead, I thought, and a wave of hysteria rose through me. The zombie was in between me and the pile of makeshift weapons, and there was no way the soldiers could get up that ladder quick enough. The zombie was standing upright now, swaying from side to side, and was staring at me. I began to shuffle forwards. I held my hands up. "Please," I begged impotently. "Please don't hurt me." The zombie shuffled on. It was inches away from me. Its fetid breath was hot against my skin. Its mouth opened. Drool hung in thick trails from its yellow teeth. Its decaying lips were almost touching mine. Not so long ago, I had been daydreaming about kissing Beth. Now I was in a zombie's rancid embrace. "No!" I yelled out at the top of my voice and started to push the zombie away. I started to run with my hand still pressed against its chest, until we had reached the barrier, and suddenly the zombie was toppling over it and falling to the ground. It landed with a sickening crunch headfirst on the roof of the hire car. The soldiers turned as one to see what had happened, and then they looked up at me. One of them took aim. I raised my hands and shouted, "I'm human." Instructions were shouted up for me to come down. Feeling shaky and sick, I began to descend the ladder. Finally, I was back on the ground, but I felt a long way from safe. The soldiers fixed me with hard stares. As one continued to cover me, the other snapped, "What are you doing here?" Voluntary work," I managed to answer, "helping fix the fire tower up." The soldiers shared a look. I got the feeling that they weren't convinced I was an innocent here. I tried to explain. I was up in the deck speaking to another one of the volunteers, Beth, on my phone when I noticed that something was wrong. So I filmed the smoke over by the secret military facility and the zombies. Only until I dropped my phone. I stopped talking, realizing any chance that I might have had of them letting me go had gone. Because of my big mouth. Because I was a loser. One of the soldiers grabbed my arm and said sharply, "You're coming with us." I started to protest to tell them that this was a free country and that they couldn't treat me like this. But then my arm was pulled tightly up behind my back and the soldier snarled at me to be quiet. I was in too much pain to speak anyway and couldn't resist as I was manhandled into the back of the Jeep. One of the soldiers clambered in next to me. The other threw the zombie in the trunk, got behind the wheel and then started the engine and we were off. A radio in the front crackled with bursts of animated chatter as we clattered along the forest floor. It was these soldiers in different vehicles communicating with each other, I realized. They sounded stoked at dispatching the zombies. It didn't seem very disciplined to me and made me even more worried about my own fate. I had been detained by a bunch of yeehawing grunts and my civil rights were being stomped into dust. But then a new voice came over the radio. "Alpha 4 calling. We've got a problem here. One of the bogies that we're transporting was not tapped in the brain. I'm trying to get through to the cab. But nothing more was said. There was a moment of static bleeding out from the radio, and then the screaming began. It was hideous to hear, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. The soldier next to me swore under his breath, and we traveled on as a request for Alpha 4 to report their status was transmitted over the radio. After a couple of minutes, the driver of the Jeep exclaimed, "Up ahead." He braked. I looked over his shoulder. An army truck was stopped at an angle in front of us. Its front had collided with a tree, but its engine was still running. Tendrils of smoke rose from the bonnet. "Stay here," the soldier next to me said, and climbed out of the Jeep. The driver did the same. And they began to approach the truck, which suddenly lurched backwards. Its wheels threw up dirt as it reversed along the forest floor, and then turned so that it was facing us. My guts tightened. There was a zombie at the wheel. A grin spread across its grotesque face. The engine roared and the truck began to speed towards us. The soldier nearest fired, shattering the windscreen of the truck, which swerved before stuttering to a halt. I could see the zombie staring blindly out. Red from the fresh wound in its forehead was splattered against the inside of the cracked windscreen. The other soldier got on the radio, called in the details, and requested a tow truck and a cleanup crew. And then we were off again. We followed a rough path littered with snapped-off branches. One made, I guessed, as the convoy rushed in pursuit of the zombies, and now they seemed to be heading back from where they came. A while later, a group of buildings appeared suddenly in the clearing of the forest. They looked like industrial buildings, long squat boxes with roller shutter doors and vents at intervals along their flat roofs. As best as I could see, they were connected by covered walkways. If I had seen this complex on a regular day by the side of the highway, it was the type of place which would have passed anonymously by in the background. But on this strangest of days in the middle of nowhere, it loomed ahead of me an ominous presence. As we came closer, the driver spoke into the radio. "Bravo 16 requesting entry." A reply came a heartbeat later when a shutter door in the nearest building rattled open, and we drove into a vast open space. My senses were attacked by dozens of voices all shouting at once, by lights which felt painfully bright after the shade-dappled forest floor. by the sharp alerts of vehicles backing up, and by the clump of bodies being thrown out of the back of trucks. Bile rose into the back of my throat as I realized it was the remains of the zombies. I was still reeling from this sight when the Jeep had stopped. I was dragged from it and marched away. I had never been in a police station, but I had watched enough reality shows about cops when I was wallowing in the wake of my marriage breakup to recognize the things that I was being taken to. It was a row of cells. Though cages would be a better way to describe them, 4 of them side by side, constructed by metal bars. A guard opened up one of the cells and I was pushed inside. The door slammed to close behind me and a lock bolted in place. I sank to the ground, my back against the cold, hard bars, and hugged my knees to my chest. Through the gaps in the bars, I could still see and hear the frenzy of activity filing in the building. I was left alone though, a bystander, a prisoner. But I was not alone for long. I was wishing that I had stayed in my apartment, watching garbage TV and eating pizza, and I'd never heard of the fire tower when I heard a sound which sent chills down my spine. A growl. I looked up. A zombie was being pulled towards the cells. Its neck was held in a collar attached to a long pole which was gripped by a soldier. It was the type of thing that would be used to capture and move a feral dog. The zombie foamed at the mouth and thrashed against its restraint, but the soldier managed to get it up to the cell next to mine. The cell had already been unlocked by a guard who clearly wanted to keep his distance from the zombie. The soldier pushed the zombie inside, threw the pole in after it, and the cell was locked. The soldier and the guard high-fived each other and walked away. "Wait," I called after them. "You can't leave me here with that." They both gave me the finger and kept walking. I looked at my new neighbor through the bars which were all that divided us. The zombie wore a soldier's uniform and I wondered if it had been on board Alpha 4 and turned by their rogue passenger. Was that why it hadn't been dispatched by a bullet to the brain? Whatever the reason, it had been spared, it was there, and it was deranged. Flecks of spittle flew from its cracked lips as it shuffled around its cell, groaning and shaking its head. Lost in its fury, the zombie did not seem to have noticed me, so I tried to keep it that way by not moving a muscle. I failed. I started to shake uncontrollably all over. My teeth started to chatter. I couldn't stop. In the other cell, the zombie started growling. It raised its head slowly and it looked at me. It was aware of me now. Its bloodshot eyes shone with anger. A low growl once more began to drift from its mouth and it took a step towards me. I clambered to my feet and stumbled backwards until I reached the far end of my cell, where I watched in horror as the zombie shuffled closer. It reached the bars that stood between us and roared in frustration that its way was blocked. It forced a hand through a gap in the bars, scraping off its own skin and leaving raw flesh beneath. Its fingers clawed at the air. Reason would have told me that there was no way it could get through, but I wasn't thinking straight. I was terrified, and at first I didn't notice that the door to my cell was being opened. I only realized when the zombie turned its murderous gaze towards the guard who had opened it up, and the man who was stepping past him into my cell. He had a buzz cut, a square jaw, and no neck as far as I could see. Slabs of muscle bulged under a uniform, on the collars of which a star stood out. He looked at the zombie and drawled, "I'll deal with you later after I've had a conversation with this civilian." And then he turned to me, narrowed his eyes, and said, "I've had a bad day, son. The facility is compromised, so I'm shutting it down and clearing the place out. It'll be like we were never here if anybody goes bleeding to the press. As for you, your phone was recovered from the scene. It was still working. The nerds here unlocked it, and I saw the film. which means you know too much and have been designated a threat to national security. You and your girlfriend are a loose end that needs tying up." "She's not my girlfriend," was all that I managed to say before something sharp stuck my arm. I looked down to see the syringe and then the cell began to spin around me. The next thing I knew, I was opening my eyes. Everything was blurred. I felt sick, groggy, and I had no idea where I was or how I had got there. I rubbed my eyes and my vision began to clear. I was lying next to a woman with long dark hair. It was Beth. For a moment I thought that I was having a wonderful dream, and then I saw that we were lying on the floor of the observation deck. This was not a dream. It was a waking nightmare from which there was no escape. Beth opened her eyes and put her hand to her forehead. "Sons of a," she exclaimed hoarsely. "I got a text from you at the end of my shift saying the area had been declared safe and that you needed me to come to the fire tower. I was worried and so I drove straight out here, but when I arrived, the soldiers grabbed me and injected me." I echoed her curse and then said, "It was a trap. They must have used my phone. They're experimenting with zombies, Beth, and think that you know about it as well. They want to cover it all up." She sat up and there was steel in her voice when she said, "No way, we're getting out of here." I must admit at that moment in time I had never been more attracted to Beth. Call it hormones, call it the fact that I was having a crazy day or that I had just been drugged. But I had to tell her that I liked her there and then. I began to say, "Beth, until she talked over me asking, "Can you smell that?" I focused and could smell something. It was the smell of burning. Beth was already on her feet and moving towards the barrier. I followed and together we peered over the side. We swore in unison. The base of the fire tower was in flames, the legs were being engulfed and the ladder consumed. "I'll phone 911, Beth told me and reached into the back pocket of her jeans. Her face fell and she said, "The soldiers must have taken my phone. They've left us stranded." And they set the fire to make it look like our deaths were accidental. I added grimly. As I spoke, burning embers drifted up past my face. The fire was only minutes away from reaching the observation deck. I felt a tear run down my face. This was it. I was going to die. The sound of wood crackling and spitting filled the air as a high-pitched noise rose and fell in the distance. From her expression, Beth had heard it as well. She punched the air and cried out, "Go, Mike!" And then she turned to me and said, "I had called Mike when I got the message that I thought was from you. He said that he would head out as well. He must be nearby and had seen the fire and called his old buddies at the fire service." "We're saved," I exclaimed. Beth high-fived me. "Saved," she echoed. Just before a loud crack sounded below us and the deck rocked violently, almost knocking me off my feet. "The legs are giving way," Beth yelled. The sound of the siren was getting louder, but even if the fire service arrived in the next 30 seconds, they would be too late. And then I saw a car emerge from the forest and screech to a halt. Mike jumped out. He started to run for the fire tower, but the flames forced him back. It was hopeless. There was nothing that anyone could do. And then I heard the dull clump of a helicopter's blades and span around. A chopper marked with the fire service's insignia was heading over the forest canopy. It reached the deck, hovered over us, and a figure appeared in one of the doors. They began to descend on a line, reaching us moments later. A harness was looped around Beth and she was lifted. I watched her ascend. Another crack, another violent tilt of the deck sent me sprawling. I rolled onto my back and watched as the figure was lowered back down towards me. The harness went around me and I was lifted off the deck, just in time. Below me, the deck collapsed and fell into the inferno. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground. The air was thick with smoke and there was a fire truck parked up on one side of me. And Beth was there kneeling over me, a look of concern on her face. "Welcome back," she said. I coughed and said, "We made it." "We did," she replied, "and now we're safe." "I'm trying to remember, was there something that you were going to say to me before we realized that the tower was on fire?" My throat suddenly felt dry, and it was nothing to do with the smoke and the heat. Yeah. I wanted to tell you that I really like you and well, I was wondering if you would want to go out with me." Beth smiled and answered, "Hey, it's Saturday night. Let's go for a cold beer and I'll think about it." And that worked just fine with me. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. With prices going up on just about everything lately, being smart with your money isn't just a good idea, it's essential. But managing subscriptions, tracking spending, and cutting costs can feel overwhelming. Lucky for you, Rocket Money takes the guesswork out of it all so that you can easily make smart choices. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. Rocket Money sends out alerts if bills increase in price, there is unusual spending activity, or if you're close to going over budget. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when they use all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Download the Rocket Money app and enter my show name, Creepypasta, in the survey so that they know I sent you. Don't wait. Download the Rocket Money app today and tell them that you heard about them from my show. I always wanted to be a park ranger for as long as I can remember. Being out in nature, hiking, camping, and fishing, that was pretty much all I wanted to do as a kid. Once I realized that profession existed, it was my only career pursuit, and I trained for it like an astronaut going to outer space. Reading up on all the necessary qualifications, I learned that it was a pretty daunting undertaking in a lot of ways. To be a park ranger, you need to be an expert outdoorsman. You need to be physically strong and to have a good endurance. You need to be confident with firearms if you're working in an area with bears and cougars. And you need to have first aid training and a range of other certifications. But those hurdles didn't stop me. They inspired me. Throughout my late teens and early 20s, I had a corkboard on my bedroom wall with every park ranger requirement listed on it, flanked by photos of my favorite national parks, and I checked the qualifications off one by one, celebrating as I achieved them. Living at home with my parents, I saved up every penny that I earned, with the goal of going to school for conservation enforcement, one of several programs geared towards people in my aspiring line of work. Eventually, I got my diploma from a nearby community college, which was about all that I could afford. It took a while and I worked a lot of crappy odd jobs, but eventually, I was hired full-time by the Forestry Service as a fire lookout. This was after at least 30 rejected applications. By that point, the recruiters probably knew my resume by heart without even having to read it. I was thrilled and accepted the job with a cry of joy over the phone, to which my boss laughed and said he was looking forward to meeting me. Throughout my on-the-job training, I picked up things quickly and my supervisor named Ross said that I was a natural. It wasn't long before he was sending me out alone to clear brush or do simple tasks, despite the fact that he was supposed to be shadowing me the entire time. He said he trusted me and that it took a lot to gain his trust. On my last day of training at Fire Tower 14, we were sitting in the cabin playing chess when Ross had noticed something in the distance, a bit of smoke rising up out of the trees. It was just a wisp of white smoke, indicative of a campsite. "We should go check that out," Ross said, handing the binoculars to me and pointing. I saw it immediately and I nodded, thinking that it would be nice to get out and do something different. The routine of clearing brush and taking out the trash, reading books and playing board games and cards was getting monotonous. It was late afternoon and there was still several hours of sunlight left. I grabbed my backpack and my rifle, filled my canteen with water and was about to set out, when Ross muttered something over my shoulder. "Son of a," he said, a little louder this time. It wasn't like him to curse, and I was a little surprised to hear him do it. Ross reminded me of a Boy Scout in a man's body. His enthusiasm for the job was infectious, and he was almost always in a good mood. "What?" I asked, walking over to join him. "Another one. Nobody bothers to get a camping permit these days anymore." He pointed at another fire burning in the distance, this one a little closer. Normally, we wouldn't go out to bother campers, but these were not registered camping sites, and people like that often didn't bother to clean up after themselves, and sometimes got injured out in the woods since they weren't prepared. Most people who care enough to go camping properly will actually acquire a camping permit. They know that it isn't worth the risk of being fined. These people clearly didn't care. "You know what?" Ross said, looking at me. "This is actually perfect. It's your last day of training, which means next time something like this happens, you'll be on your own. Nobody around for miles. So let's split up the two offenders and we'll each take one. I'll be in radio contact with you the whole time. They look like they're only a couple of miles away from each other. How's that sound?" Despite the fact that I had been eager for the job my entire life, now that I was faced with the prospect of doing it alone, I was a little bit nervous. But I nodded my head, agreeing with his plan. "All right, let's do it," I said. "Just like we practiced," he told me as we began to climb down the stairs from the tower. "Don't get into any confrontations. If they want to get into an argument, you walk away and call me for backup. Otherwise, just give them a citation and move on. Tell them to find a new campsite or we'll be back to confiscate their gear. You know, the usual routine." The two of us took the Jeep, which was parked at the base of the tower, and drove down the dirt trail until we saw the first vehicle, pulled over at the side of the road. It was empty with no one inside. "Okay, you take this one. Radio me once you make contact. Remember, don't take any unnecessary risks. If anything doesn't seem right, just let me know." He looked very nervous all of a sudden, and it was making me more worried than I had been a second before. He looked like he wanted to say something else and he opened his mouth, as if he were about to do so, but then he shook his head as if telling himself not to. After a few seconds of awkwardness, I reassured him that I would radio him once I made contact. He told me to get going and to stay safe, driving off once I had shut the passenger door of the Jeep. I was left alone, surrounded by wilderness. Taking a deep breath and letting it out, I began to march into the trees toward the smell of campfire smoke in the distance. The brush was thick since there was no real trail here, but I could see where the campers had dragged their cooler through the shrubbery, and I could make out their boot prints in the mud. If I had to guess, there were at least 3 or 4 of them. It didn't take long before I came across a clearing, and standing in the middle of it was a large stone archway. The human-made structure was about a 10-minute walk from the road, and it looked like a bridge constructed for a railroad to pass over above it. But it made no sense for it to be way out here in the middle of the forest, far from any civilization, and far from any active railroads. A dirt path emerged from nowhere leading towards this arch, and going underneath it to the other side. I didn't know the area well enough to say that this was completely out of the ordinary, but to my eyes, it did look unusual. Ross hadn't mentioned any decommissioned railroads passing through this part of the forest, but then again, it could have been long out of use and ancient. When I approached the stone archway, I got a queasy, rising feeling in my stomach. like when you're a kid in the backseat of a car and your parents are driving down a hilly dirt road, and if you go over a steep hill too fast on the opposite side. Looking through the archway, I saw the sky was a bruised shade of purple on the other side. Black clouds floated along, in stark contrast to the clear blue sky which I had seen from the watchtower. I looked over my shoulder and the sky was blue. I looked straight ahead again and saw that it was that surreal purple shade, but only on this side of the archway. What the heck? I muttered to myself, walking through the stone archway to the other side. The moment that I did, my body broke out in pins and needles, as if every limb had fallen asleep for just a second, but then the sensation passed. I felt as if I had crossed over through some threshold into another world, but I convinced myself that I was just being foolish, letting my adrenaline get to me. This was simply a new and scary experience, being alone by myself out here, but I would need to get used to it fast. Steeling myself with a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and continued marching forward. The forest was still the same, but the sky was that dark purple shade, and I didn't understand why it would look like that. It was still a few hours until sunset, so it wasn't being caused by the sun's approach toward the horizon. It was something else. A forest fire, maybe. "Ross, come in, Ross," I said into my radio, which was clipped to my uniform shirt. There was a burst of static, but nothing after that. "Ross, status update, come in, Ross." Again, there was nothing. "Great, some backup you are." The forest swallowed me up again as I walked along the path until it had disappeared. Strangely, the woods were difficult to traverse in this section. Huge trees blocked my path, their low branches impossible to get around. I had completely lost the camper's trail, and I was starting to worry that I had lost my bearings altogether, so I pulled out my compass to regain my trajectory. When I looked down at the face of the compass, it didn't make any sense. It wasn't pointing in any one direction. Instead, it spun around in lazy half and quarter circles, reversing and changing direction constantly. And then it began to spin in a maddening arc, faster and faster, going in circles until the glass broke and the needle flew off into the sky, completely unhinged from the device. I heard it whiz past my ear like a stray bullet. Okay, that was weird. I tried to comprehend what was happening. What could cause a compass to do that? A strong magnet? That was impossible, though. All of this was impossible. I looked up at the sky and traced the bruised purple color, turning my head so I could see behind me. The violet shade now covered the entire sky, including behind me where it had been bright blue just minutes prior. What the heck was going on? I turned around and started back, my heart beating fast, my legs trembling and numb, feeling like blocks of wood attached to the waist. Had a nuclear bomb detonated somewhere? Was this the end of the world? Was that why the sky looked so strange now? I keyed the radio again, hoping that I would get a response from Ross as I blundered through the forest feeling sick. It felt like I was going to throw up. "Ross, come in, Ross," I practically screamed into the radio, but there was no answer. I began to run, picking up my pace. It was that archway. I should have never gone through it. I could tell that it was wrong. I could tell that it was evil. That feeling of pins and needles, that rising sensation in my gut. Every part of my body had been trying to tell me to not go through it, but I hadn't listened. I had heard stories before, read tales on the internet of back rooms and hidden interdimensional portals which led to places like this that shouldn't exist. Dimensions locked away through space and time and other mechanisms that we don't understand, which people stumble into and can't escape. Stairs that lead to nowhere but take a portion of your lifespan, should you decide to climb them, causing you to disappear from your friends and family for untold lengths of time. People vanished in national parks all the time, and there was no explanation for it. At least, not until now. I pushed aside the brush and made my way out of the forest and into the clearing where the archway had been. My heart sank as I stared at the blank spot where it had been. The stone archway was gone. I stood there for a while just staring at the blank space where it had previously stood. But it didn't change the fact that the whole thing had vanished. I spun around in circles, thinking maybe that I had lost my way and gone off track. Maybe this was all in my head and I had only lost track of time. That was why the sky was purple and why I was having trouble finding my way back. I was entrapped in another dimension. I had just spaced out and the sun was setting. That was all that it was, and nothing more. I convinced myself this was true even though part of me knew that it wasn't. If I kept walking in this direction, I told myself, I would hit the dirt road eventually. I was sure enough of my bearings to know that the road lay in this direction, and I could simply walk back to Tower 14 once I had found it. Sure, Ross would be pissed and he would tell his bosses that I needed more training and that I wasn't ready yet. But that was okay. Maybe I wasn't. Despite all my years of getting ready for this day, maybe I was still just an amateur. With this new plan in mind, I kept walking straight back the way that I had come. I knew better than to push it when I had already lost my bearings, and not to mention my compass. The best bet was just to walk back to the safety of the road. The longer I walked, though, the more I began to realize what I had suspected deep down was true. The road was not there. Oh no, oh no, no. I muttered to myself as my progress came to a halt. It's not here. The road should have been here, even if I was slightly off course. I should have seen it by now, but it was nowhere to be found. Worse than that, the sky was getting dimmer with those horrible black clouds, covering up the patches of purple and filling them with malignant darkness. Ross, please come in. I yelled into the radio for what felt like the 100th time. A clap of thunder boomed overhead, sounding discordant and wrong to my ears. It was a bad imitation of thunder. A Foley artist still learning the ropes as he shook out a giant sheet of tin like a rug on cleaning day. It warbled and shook the ground, the reverberations lasting far too long afterwards. That was what did it. The sound of that alien thunder brought me over the edge of certainty, and I knew for sure in that moment what I had suspected all along. This wasn't the national park. This wasn't even Earth anymore. At least not my Earth. I truly had slipped into another dimension through that archway. Despite how mad it all sounded, I was on the other side of some multi-dimensional gateway. And not only that, but now the gateway was gone. I was trapped here. Turning around, I decided I needed to go back to the place where I had found it. Even if it was gone now, it would have to return eventually. That was my only hope. I couldn't stay in this place. I didn't belong here. And who knew what creatures might lurk in a forest like this after dark? Even in our world, there were wolves, coyotes, mountain lions, and bears. I shuddered to think what version of predator might live unchecked in this universe, without people around to keep their numbers down. As if the forest had read my mind, I heard a rustling sound to my right. The light was dimmer now and it was difficult to see, but I thought that I had noticed something a ways off in the distance, ducking behind trees and hiding from view, following me through the dark woods. Was it a person? It kind of looked like one. Hello? I called out, my voice breaking with fear. Hello? It called back, sounding like a tape recording of my own voice, slightly sped up and slowed down halfway through the word. The thing paused momentarily as it ducked out from behind the trees, looking at me, measuring me. standing in plain view for the first time as if letting itself be seen. My skin turned ice cold when I caught a full glimpse of it. It saw me, that was for sure, and it was following me. The dark humanoid shape had grayish-blue skin and at least 2 sets of arms. It walked on 2 legs and ducked behind each tree as it passed by, so as not to be seen. Its face was shrouded in long black hair, which covered its visage like heavy curtains. It was completely unclothed, its long hair covering most of it, and carrying nothing with it. To my eyes, it looked like an animal, a creature more than a person, although it walked on 2 legs and it resembled a human. The extra set of arms was the most jarring aspect of it though, and it made it feel so much more like a nightmare, like this couldn't possibly be happening. My heart was pounding fast as I tripped over branches and fallen trees, stumbling and rising to my feet and looking to see if the thing was even closer now. It was on a diagonal path through the trees, pursuing me but also making its way closer and closer to me. For the first time I saw its eyes behind the mask of tangled hair. They were reflective in gold like a cat in the night. And then I saw its teeth and its rancid and rotten smile. It rubbed its 4 hands together in a ball of moving flesh and fingers, like an excited old man about to eat his favorite meal. The creature knew I was scared and it was enjoying itself, enjoying the hunt. Another twig snapped underfoot, and at first I thought it was my own foot which had done it, since the sound was so close, but then I realized it was only a few feet away, which meant I spun around just in time to see a face appear in front of me. At first I thought it was another one of those things, and almost took a wild swing at it, but then I saw the face of a human. It was a man wearing a park ranger uniform. His hair was shoulder length and greasy, and he had a long beard which was untrimmed and scraggly. "Get behind me," he yelled suddenly, and I did as he asked instinctively, hearing the sound of movement coming towards us through the brush from where the creature had been. The sound of the rifle's report was deafening. My ears were still ringing when he fired again a few moments later. "That's my last bullet," he said, grabbing my arm and pulling me to my feet. "I hope you brought some ammunition with you. Those things don't like to die." Noises could be heard behind us, and I realized that the creature was still in pursuit, despite 2 well-placed rifle rounds. I was compelled to follow the strange man as he raced ahead of me, looking back at me occasionally to see if I was still trailing him. I didn't have time to ask questions. I didn't have time to think about the fact that the archway was getting further and further away with each step. All I could do was run, and soon the sounds of more racing footsteps had joined the first creature. There were several of them, and they were all hungry, moving in a pack like humanoid wolves. I only hoped this man knew where he was going, and that he had a plan to survive. I soon learned that the other ranger who had rescued me was named David, and said he had been trapped in this place for a month. He had a cave which he had managed to camouflage with tree branches, allowing us to hide from the creatures after escaping from them. David knew a lot about this place, and he said the creatures avoided a certain part of the forest, so that was where he took me. He had set up traps which only he knew the placement of, and his hideout was there, stocked with provisions. "A lot of the plant life here is the same as in our world," he told me when we had arrived back at his camp. "I found a patch of shiitake mushrooms, and I've been surviving on those more or less. I had a few things in my bag, an energy bar, some trail mix, the usual stuff, but I ran out of that pretty quickly." He showed me his little pile of foraged food, and I marveled at how well prepared he was. There were different species of mushrooms, some wild root vegetables, and some roughage that he had set aside to make a salad with. "This is incredible," I said, and I thought that I was a good survivalist. "Nah, you're still young," he told me. "I've been doing this sort of thing for a long time. I was in the British Special Air Services when I was younger. They are highly trained soldiers, sort of like your special forces. Since I got across the pond, I've worked here and there. But most recently, I've been in the fire lookout at Tower 14 for almost 10 years. I let out a soft gasp. That's where I'm stationed. You worked at Tower 14. He chuckled. Worked, past tense. Dang, they replaced me already, huh? Well, I guess they must have given up looking for me too then. I thought back to that odd look that Ross had given me when letting me out of the Jeep. He looked like he was going to say something, but maybe, don't get killed or disappear like the last guy, would have been too on the nose. Maybe he had been thinking about how this was a bad idea, I realized. Maybe he was thinking we should go together, but instead, he had let me go alone. I felt a twinge of anger thinking about how none of this would have happened if Ross had been shadowing me like he was supposed to be. They're still looking for you, I said, not really knowing if that was true. I'm sure they are. They wouldn't just forget about you. Ross didn't get around to telling me that yet, that's all. I'm still in training. I didn't add that this was my last day of training, or that news of David's disappearance seemed to have been purposefully omitted from my orientation. David eyed me suspiciously but didn't say another word about it. I was going to look for more mushrooms when I spotted you. It's too dangerous to go out again tonight, but tomorrow we'll check for the archway again, and I'll show you where I found them. I go back to that same spot every day and look for that arch. I can't believe I missed it. He was peeling a mushroom with his knife as he spoke, but with that last sentence, he hurled the blade across the room where it clanged against the rock wall, making a loud noise. Quiet, I whispered, yelled at him. I know you're upset, but we're gonna get out of here. His face was emotionless as he looked back at me, tears welling up in his eyes. That's what I've been telling myself for the last 36 days, he said. I hope to God you're right. As I tried to fall asleep that night, I couldn't. The idea of a man like David being brought to tears by this place was almost too much to bear. The man was a killing machine, British Special Forces. He had saved my life and pulled me out of a situation where I would have thought I would be dead for sure. At least we had more ammunition now, and 2 guns, but still that didn't reassure me very much. Those creatures, whatever they were, did not like to die. I managed a few hours of off and on sleep before the sun came up, still appearing that same horrible shade of purple as it had the day before. It was starting to hurt my head. It felt wrong just being in this place. It was like we didn't belong here, like the air was too thick and too heavy, not meant for me to breathe. Without even realizing it, I had begun to hyperventilate. I tried to stop myself to calm myself down, but I was unable to. David came over and looked in my eyes, and after a while, I started to hear the words that he was saying. The cave was still beginning to turn darker and darker all around me, and I could feel myself losing consciousness, but I managed to listen to him. Breathe deep, he said. Slow it down, you're okay. I've lived here this long, the air is breathable. You're okay, big deep breaths, lad. Good. Okay, that's better. Keep breathing in and out. After a while, I started to calm down, and I looked at him gratefully. Thanks, I said. I needed that. Stay there and get your wits about you. I've got breakfast ready, he said. And I realized that he had a portion of mushrooms and wild lettuce set aside for me. He brought it over on a flat rock and handed the food to me. What's the plan? I asked, eyeing the food suspiciously. Despite the fact that he said it was okay, I was still concerned. Eat, he told me. You need your energy. We're gonna walk over to the shiitake patch. On the way, we'll check for the arch. On the way back, we'll check again. That's all that we can really do. It's not safe lingering out there for too long. Those things, they can smell us. I managed to eat a bit of the salad and mushrooms, despite the fact that they made me uneasy. Consuming anything, even the air in this world, just felt wrong, like I was breathing in toxic fumes and not meant for human consumption. Still, a little bit of the food couldn't hurt me. At least, that's what I told myself. After eating, we set out for the archway. The hike was a long one, and David brought plenty of water and provisions, filling up our canteens from a spring along the way. Once again, I felt glad for his guidance. If not for him, I'd probably be dead 10 times by now. After a long while, we reached the clearing where the arch had been. Once again, it wasn't there. The spot where it had been was empty, but we all wandered over to it anyway. How can it just disappear? Be here one day and gone the next? I asked. David shook his head. How can any of this be possible? I wouldn't have believed it if somebody had told me. Would you? I thought about it for a few seconds. No, probably not. I would think that they were crazy, or high, or maybe both. And yet here we are, defying all rational common sense. There wasn't much more to say, so we continued walking. I tried desperately to ignore the feeling that I heard the sounds of rustling leaves behind us, as if there was someone following quietly and at a distance. Every time I looked back, there was no one there. Eventually, we had reached the shiitake patch. David told me to start picking the mushrooms quickly before the creatures found us. He said they were smart and they would send out scouts, so once they knew where we were, more would be gathered together and they would come back to hunt us like pack animals. The worst part was, they knew this was a favorite spot of his, so they would be ready for him. After a few short minutes of gathering mushrooms, David told me to wrap it up. Let's go, he said. There's no more time. Despite my fear, I couldn't believe what he was saying. We had just started and it had been such a long hike, and this amount of mushrooms would barely sustain us for a day. Well, come on, David, a few more minutes. I said let's go. He hissed at me, his face morphing into one of rage. I almost didn't recognize him. His color changed, going red, almost purple, and there was something else strange too. His chest seemed to spasm when he was angry. The fabric puffed in and out in a very odd way, like he was breathing much too fast. He caught me looking at him and calmed down slightly, then came over to me and grabbed my arm, dragging me away from the mushroom patch. I can see one, it's a little ways away at 6 o'clock. That means there's more. We need to start walking fast, don't run yet. Don't look. Don't let them know that we saw them. All of this he said while dragging me away from the patch, and I fought the urge to glance over my shoulder. But I did hear the distinct sound of movement now, coming closer, gaining on us steadily. Do you hear that? I asked, my heart pounding faster, my throat dry, my knees shaking. Quiet, he whispered angrily. I was silent for a few short seconds and the noises came closer and closer. Run, he screamed, and I began to bolt as fast as I could through the trees. A second later, I heard them all around us. They had surrounded us, they had been waiting. You're gone, David screamed from behind me, and I tried to get her ready while still running. And then I saw what he was worried about. One of the creatures was straight ahead, waiting for us partially hidden behind a tree. It revealed itself just barely, poking its head out to look and see how far off we were, and then it disappeared again. You see it, he shouted. Yeah. When we get to that tree, you go left and I go right. Don't get too close. I understood immediately what he was doing. He was sacrificing himself for me. By going to the right, he was running right through the eye line of the creature. He would be running past it within inches of its grasp, all to distract it so it wouldn't get me. Part of me wanted to argue, but there was no time. We were already at the tree. I ran to the left and David went right. The creature lunged at him just as I had feared, and managed to rake him with its long, talon-like fingernails. His back was bloodied as he ran, getting ahead of me as he put on speed. "There's more up ahead," he yelled, and I saw them a second later. There were at least 2, maybe more, hiding in the trees and waiting for us a little ways ahead. I had a feeling they would not be fooled as easily as the last one. Luckily, we had a speed advantage on the creatures, at least the ones that we had come across so far. I hated to think what a faster version of these things would look like. Our ability to outrun them was the only thing keeping us alive. I could hear them chasing after us, their heavy footsteps loud as they crushed the leaves underfoot. "Let's split up," David said. "You go left, I'll go right. Then we meet back in the middle, say 100 paces from here. Got it?" "Sure," I agreed, not sure what other options we had. I was deferring to him since he seemed to know what he was doing. "Now," he yelled, and he branched off from our trajectory, heading to the right. At the same time, I went left. The creatures took a moment to respond, but once they saw what we were doing, they left their hiding spots where they were waiting to ambush us. The creature closest to me came at me from my right, and I screamed as it came within a few feet of me, its horrifying arms reaching out to grab me. I felt the breeze from its hand rushing past, but managed to duck out of the way just in time, stumbling over a fallen log and face planting right afterwards. The thing crawled after me and I felt it grab my ankle, pulling me towards it as I screamed. And kicking as hard as I could with the other leg, I brought my foot up into the creature's jaw, where it connected with a sickening crunch. It howled a cry of hurt anger as its grip loosened on my ankle for a split second. I attempted to wrench myself free, but it held on tightly. The thing was strong. I was about to kick it again when it grabbed my other leg and began to crawl in towards my face. Its oversized eyes widened with anticipation, drool pouring over its lower lip. The thing was about to eat me. As it unhinged its jaw like a python about to consume a deer, I remembered the rifle slung over my back. The thing darted its head forward toward my neck as if to start its meal with my jugular. The rifle was caught underneath my body weight. I was trying to rock side to side to pull it free while simultaneously shoving the thing away from me with my knees, kicking and bucking and doing anything I could to weasel my way from its grasp. Just as its teeth were about to snap shut around my windpipe, I managed to free the rifle. Using all of my strength, I pulled my knees back and kicked the creature in its chest, sending it reeling backwards for a half an instant. Just enough time for me to get a shot off. Boom. The blast echoed through the forest, exploding outwards from the barrel of the rifle. One moment the creature was there in front of me, and the next its head was gone, replaced by a crater jettisoning blood from the ruined remains of the creature's visage. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not looking back. After a long and harrowing run through the forest, I met up with David again. He looked even worse for wear than before. Whereas I had gotten away cleanly, he had been mauled by one of the creatures, just barely escaping with his life. He was bloodied and had gashes on his neck, his forehead, and both of his arms from defensive wounds. And worst of all, he had lost his gun in the process. And now we were down to only one weapon for defense and half the ammo. Eventually, we arrived back at the cave after a long run through the forest, barely escaping with our lives. David was in rough shape, and I helped him lay down in his bedroll. I went outside to find leaves or whatever possible to patch up his wounds, in the absence of bandages. I had a small first aid kit with me as well, which I brought everywhere, but it wasn't nearly enough for the injuries that he had sustained. I cleaned his wounds and packed the worst of them with gauze from my first aid kit, and then wrapped them with long leaves from the forest. David began pushing me away when I went to unbutton his shirt to tend to the wounds on his back. I told him to calm down, but he wouldn't stop resisting me. Eventually, I relented and told him to deal with the cuts himself. They wouldn't heal properly if he didn't do something about them, but he just closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. The blood running from his wounds leaking onto the rock floor of the cavern while he snored. For the second night in a row, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about David and his injuries. He would be dead by the morning if I didn't do something. There was too much blood loss, and I couldn't understand why someone with his level of experience wasn't taking this seriously. Was he delirious? Suddenly, his snoring stopped. The cave was dead quiet and still in the darkness of the night. And then I heard a sound like rocks being moved, a shuffling of feet, bones creaking and cracking. There was a wet, sloppy sound, smacking lips and rending flesh. Someone pulling meat from bone and tearing gristle with sharp incisors. I peered into the darkness of the cave, looking in the direction of the sound, and my eyes slowly began to adjust. David was up and he was eating something in the corner of the dark cave. It looked like it was moving, a rat or a squirrel. He tore another bite of flesh from the writhing thing which had been moving in his grasp, and suddenly it was still again. The only sound was of him chewing. My eyes adjusted further, my heart pounding rapidly. David's shirt was off. He had treated his wounds after all. In the darkness, when I had been trying to sleep, my eyes closed, he had been busy dealing with his injuries. And I realized why he hadn't wanted me to see beneath his clothes. It all made sense suddenly. The twitching beneath his shirt when he got upset, the way that his color changed when he was angry. His face had turned red, almost purple like the sky. And beneath his shirt was the most obvious change of all. He took another large bite of whatever it was he had found scurrying in the cave, and with his 4 quickly moving hands, he pulled flesh from the bones and crammed more of the creature into his mouth. His eyes were golden and reflective when they caught me staring at him in the darkness, and as I got to my feet, I began to run. I stumbled out from the cave, terrified. My legs didn't seem to work properly. Everything around me was wrong, the colors, the shadows, the shapes of the trees, and the sounds of these singing birds sitting on their branches. This world was not my own, and I needed to get out, now. Running as fast as I could through the forest, I remembered how I had come to be in this place, as a park ranger trainee. I had been on a fire lookout assignment and had been sent to confront a few campers who had made a bonfire without a permit in an off-limits area. But I had stumbled through to a gateway to another world in the process, becoming lost in this place, trapped in another dimension where humanoid creatures with gray skin and forearms hunted people in the purple-tinged darkness. I fell flat on my face, landing hard after tripping over something. A vine. No, whatever it was thin and sharp and it hurt me badly. The piano wire, or whatever it was, had cut across my shins, and I felt the warmth of blood trickling from the skin. The traps. I had forgotten all about the traps that David had set, all throughout this part of the forest, to keep him safe from the creatures in this terrifying world. "Come back," I heard David yelling over my shoulder from the darkness. "It's not safe, you must come back." But I didn't listen. I scrambled back to my feet and began to run. My only thought was to get to that archway, the place where I had entered this world. The portal back to Earth had to be there. It had to be. David's voice could be heard receding into the distance behind me. I shuddered involuntarily, thinking about how I had seen him in the darkness of the cave, eating something like a rat or a mouse. Not only that, but his arms. His arms had been too many. There was an extra pair of hands working at the hairy flesh of the vermin that he had been eating. The bloody fur and the tearing sounds of him ripping chunks from the creature's body with his teeth were too much to think about. At first, I thought maybe he was lying to me from the beginning, and that he was from this place after all. Maybe he was born here and was trying to keep me trapped in this place. but the more that I considered it, the more I realized that idea didn't sit right with me. David was not a denizen of this terrible, violet-tinted world. No, he was from Earth. The way that he spoke, talking about Fire Tower 14, which he said he had worked at, proved that he was not from here. He was from Earth. My mind began to work out what this meant and came to the conclusion that being in this world had changed you over time. Being here, eating the foraged food and breathing the purple-tinged air, all of it was toxic to people from our world, and it caused side effects that were likely permanent. I only hoped that I hadn't been here long enough for a change to occur in me. I shuddered at that thought of an extra pair of arms splitting open the flesh of my abdomen and reaching out, grabbing anything they could to get their hands on. Hungry and desperate for food, for blood and flesh, and I needed to get out of this place. Running through the woods more carefully now, I lifted my feet high off the ground to avoid tripwires, and hoped that I wouldn't stumble into a spike-filled pit or some other death trap which David had planted. Before being hired as a fire lookout, David had served in the British military, a highly trained branch similar to the Special Forces in America. He was a deadly shot with a rifle, and I no longer had mine with me. I picked up my pace, hearing the sound of him coming after me through the forest. He was injured and that would slow him down, but he also knew this place far better than I did. He knew where the traps were located and how to avoid them, whereas I was just hoping to be able to find my way back to the archway. The possibility of getting lost forever in the wilderness of this strange world occurred to me briefly, but I tried not to think about it. Trying to remember the way that we had traveled through the forest, I stepped tentatively across the ground, no longer running, but slowly walking through the trees now. I was terrified of stepping on a spike or tumbling into a pit with spikes at the bottom, ready to impale me. David had told me more than once to never go out alone, since he had placed traps everywhere in this area. There was a noise close behind me, and I looked back to see David was following me from a distance and gaining on me, and I picked up my pace and began to run again. "Come back," he called after me, his voice sounding different now, distorted and wrong. "It's not safe." Breaking into a sprint, I hoped to lose him in the darkness. For a time, it seemed to work. He was slower due to his injuries or his mutations, and he was hobbling when I saw him again, trailing me from a distance now. Confident that I had managed to escape the section of forest where he was hiding his traps, I began to make my way towards the archway. There were certain landmarks that David had shown me to find my way back to it, but none of them looked quite the same at night. In fact, nothing looked the same at night. I was starting to worry that I had become completely lost when I finally saw the huge oak tree with its one low branch that pointed the way. Following David's prior advice, I continued traveling that direction. After a long period of walking, I realized the sun had begun to rise, looking purple and bloated and wrong as it always did in this world. But at least it gave another indication of which direction I should be walking towards, and it helped to light the way, making the landmarks more obvious as I came across each one. Here was the babbling brook which I would follow for a little while, and there was the strange boulder that looked like a face. I felt a pang of regret at leaving David behind after he had saved my life, showing me how to survive in this world. But then I shook my head and reconsidered. No, I couldn't go back to that cave. Maybe he was eating rats now, but what if tomorrow he had developed a taste for my flesh? What if I woke up to find him hunched over me, eating my leg or my foot? No, going back was not an option. If David was still following me, there was no indication of it. I couldn't hear him chasing me anymore, and he wasn't calling after me. Maybe because he was worried about alerting the creatures to his presence. The clearing where the archway had been was not far now. It was just another 10 minutes or so of walking, and I was just hoping it would be there this time. If it wasn't, I was completely unsure of what I would do. I had been trying not to think about that part of things, since the idea of the portal not being there was too much to bear. "Come back!" Somebody called out from the woods, suddenly startling me. It was David. At least it sounded like him. "It isn't safe." Another voice called out from my right, sounding sped up and then slowed down, like a tape recorder running low on batteries. Leaves crunched on the ground behind me and ahead of me. From all angles, there were voices calling out in distorted tones. "Come back. It isn't safe. Come back. It isn't safe." The more they said it, the more the words didn't sound like words anymore, but just strange alien noises. They mingled together in an echoing cacophony of sounds. My heart began to pound against my sternum like a jackhammer from the inside. My palms were sweating as I tried to lift my legs to run, but realized that they wouldn't move. It was at that moment that I observed the fact that I didn't have my rifle, and it dawned on me for the first time that I had left it back at the cave, with David. And as that thought went through my mind, the trees and shrubs all around me began to rustle and sway, moving aside to reveal the gray, four-armed figures who had been lying in wait. If they know you like a particular spot, they'll start to wait for you there. They're adept hunters, and they know exactly the way to ambush someone. Trust me, I've seen it for myself. David had told me. Yeah, I thought bitterly. He had seen it firsthand with the rat in the cave, as he was turning into one of them, and he was becoming a pretty good hunter himself. The pack of creatures closed in on me from all angles, and I sucked in a terrified breath, unable to scream or run or do anything at all. It was hopeless, or so I thought. The blast of the rifle was deafening in the stillness of the forest, and I winced at the sound of it, as it took the head off the creature closest to me, which was about to grab hold of me. "Run!" David screamed from the trees, and this time I could tell very clearly that it was his voice. But at the same time, he looked different. He had left his shirt back at the cave, and the extra pair of arms in his abdomen were plainly visible now, and I could see that they were holding the rifle, with 4 hands moving rapidly. David reloaded the gun in a fraction of the time, then had the sights up to his eye again, and he was ready to fire. I did as he asked, trying to pry my eyes away from the horrifying image of what was happening. The creatures were abandoning me to go after the bigger threat, and I saw them stomping through the brush towards him as he fired the gun again, taking off the top of one of their skulls in a bloody spray. A chunk of gray brain matter landed on my cheek, and I brushed it off in disgust. Getting to my feet, I began to run, but one of the creatures had stopped me. The one that David had just shot was still somehow alive and grabbing onto my leg, digging its talon-like claws into the flesh of my ankle, gritting its teeth and staring at me with a brainless, evil hunger. I screamed and howled in pain, turning around and using my other foot to stomp on the thing's face. As it spit out broken teeth, it smiled at me, squeezing and digging its nails in deeper until I could feel blood pouring out and soaking the fabric of my sock. "Come back," it croaked in David's voice. Finally, I stepped on the thing's arm, wrenching my leg free from its grip. It was like the thing felt no pain at all, as it was immediately trying to come after me again with its other good hands. It was like all that it desired was to cause pain, but felt none of its own. Trying not to think about that, I turned away and began to run, limping on my one injured leg, ignoring the pain as I broke into a sprint. And just as I got out of sight from David, I heard him cry out in anguish. His screams cut short as one of the creatures began to chew on his windpipe. And all that could be heard after that was a hushed, gurgling sound far back in the distance, as he drowned on his own blood. Somehow I knew without even seeing it happen. David was dead. But I had no time to mourn for him. I rushed through the trees, trying to ignore the pain in my leg, hoping with every fiber of my being that the archway would be there. I spoke the words in my mind and out loud over and over again, like a mantra as the clearing came closer and drew into focus. Please be there, please be there, please be there. And when I came out from the trees and into the clearing, I almost couldn't believe my eyes. Was it a dream, a mirage, a fantasy that would disappear when I blinked my eyes and opened them again? No, it was there. It was actually there. The archway was back, and just in the nick of time. Without a moment's hesitation, I ran through it, terrified that it would disappear before I got the chance to step through the threshold and back into my dimension. Like a man terrified of elevators and worried the box would drop out at any second, I leapt through the archway and back into the glorious golden sunlight of our world. I realized immediately what I had been missing, as the blue sky above could be seen through the trees, and I noticed I was truly warm for the first time in days, as if I had been walking in shadow and only now was stepping out into the sun. As I began to walk back toward the road, I took a nervous look back over my shoulder at the archway, and I froze when I saw the disturbing sight behind me was still there. I could still see the purple sky on the other side, and that could only mean one thing. The portal was still open. Terrified of what that implied, I shuddered and continued walking, looking back every so often for the creatures, and hoping that the archway would disappear, this time for good. But it didn't. As I left it behind in the trees and lost sight of it, my last glimpse showed that evil purple sky shining through from the other side, insidiously waiting for another hiker to stumble through, or for something else to emerge from the other side. At least if I have to face another one of those creatures, it will be on my turf, I thought to myself with some slight reassurance. But I didn't have a weapon, and I would need backup. I wasn't out of the woods yet. After limping through the forest for 10 or 15 minutes, eventually I found the road. A part of me had been worried that it wouldn't be there, that this would be just another world that looked like ours, one of a million different potential places that the archway could take you to, and that I would find myself wandering through some unknown forest again, set upon by some new breed of ravenous creatures with a thirst for blood. But thankfully, this did look like the road that I had been on before, and I could even see the distinctive tread marks in the mud from what appeared to be a jeep, maybe from the day when Ross had dropped me off in this very spot. I felt a twinge of anger at the thought of my supervisor, and decided that I would let him have it the moment that I saw him. He was supposed to be my backup, and I was supposed to be learning from him. Instead, he had let me go out on my own, and now look at what had happened. Limping along the shoulder of the gravel road, eventually I saw the fire tower come into view up ahead. It came into focus gradually, emerging from the trees that hid it from my sight. The jeep was there, and I realized instantly what that meant. Ross was up there, not out looking for me like he should have been. If he had been where he was supposed to be, none of this would have happened. I climbed the wooden steps leading up to the fire tower, getting more and more enraged as I got up further, and closer to the man who I now believed was responsible for all of this. My aching leg was bloodied, and I could feel it swelling in my pant leg, tightening around it. Finally, I reached the top and threw open the door, to find Ross sitting at the table reading a book, drinking a cup of coffee. He looked surprised to see me, and shocked at the sight of me. "Holy crap," he almost screamed, knocking his coffee cup over. The brown liquid spilled all over the pages of his paperback. "You're back." "That's right," I hissed, limping towards him. I could feel my face turning hot and red. His eyes widened further. What's wrong with your face? Are you okay? You're turning purple. I didn't know what to say at that. I looked in the mirror to my left and saw that he was right. I didn't look like myself at all. I looked like a monster made of rage at that moment, my face purple with anger. Suddenly all of the fight left me and I realized how utterly exhausted I was. I heaved out a great sigh and crumpled to the floor of the fire tower cabin. I collapsed on the floor, unable to understand what was happening to me. I didn't feel like myself at all. And as I did that, I felt something writhing beneath me, a squirming feeling in my abdomen, like fingers reaching out from inside, trying to poke and tear their way through the skin of my belly. I screamed, pulling up my shirt and clutching my abdomen, feeling the skin for a bulging pair of hands or a face, picturing the movie Alien. But there was nothing. No indication of anything growing or mutating inside of me, except a slight tingling there, like fingers gently brushing up against my skin from the inside, tickling me very lightly. "No," I said aloud, still clutching myself tightly. "Dude, what happened to you?" Ross asked, looking at me with grave concern. "You've been gone for 2 days, and now you come back screaming and grabbing at yourself. Your face just went purple as an eggplant. It was like you had shock for a few seconds and now it's back to normal again. Tell me please, because I am genuinely concerned. What happened to you out there?" I took a few seconds before answering. I honestly didn't know what to say, until the words began spilling out of me. The same thing that happened to David, that's what happened to me. There was a delayed reaction as it took several seconds for him to register the name. But then he did, and his jaw dropped. "How? Where did you hear that name? How do you know about David?" "I met him," I said, and was about to continue when I heard a sound from beneath the fire tower. It sounded like somebody was coming up the stairs. I shot up to my feet, my eyes darting around the room. "Where's the rifle? You need to get your rifle now." Ross didn't know what to make of it at first and was about to question me, but then the look on my face seemed to convince him. He ran over to the gun rack on the wall and pulled on his rifle. Checking to make sure that it was loaded, he took the safety off. "Is that David?" he asked. I shook my head no. "What did you get us into exactly?" he asked nervously. But before I could respond, there was someone at the door. There was a sound of scratching, long nails against the wood as scraping it, and there was a distorted gray face at the window looking in at us. "Come back," it demanded. Ross held the scope up to his eye and got ready to fire at the door, but then the footsteps began to recede, going back down the stairs. "What the heck was that thing?" Ross asked, lowering his gun. I tried to gather my thoughts, trying to figure out how to explain it all. "Those things are deadly, and they're not from this world. They're smart and they're almost impossible to kill. Right now they're retreating, gathering reinforcements, assembling a hunting party. How can you possibly know all of this?" I led him outside and pointed down at them below. They were going back for more of their own kind, to bring them into our world. As I looked down from the lofty fire tower, I could see them moving quickly into the forest. Some were going back towards the archway, but not all of them. They were planning on staying here, making this their new home. After all, there is an abundant food supply, and no real reason to leave. I tried to sum up what had happened as well as I could in such a short time. It was difficult for him to believe, but the proof had been right in front of him. The monster had been right outside the fire tower, and we had seen more of them below us. There was no way to fake that. We needed to do something fast. "Okay, assuming you and I haven't lost our minds and just hallucinated whatever those things were, I'll take your word for all of this. So what are we going to do?" my supervisor asked reluctantly. I considered this for a few long moments. "How much gas do we have between the generator and the Jeep?" His eyes went wide after he realized why I was asking. For a while he didn't answer, but then he nodded his head and waved for me to follow him. "Enough," he said, as I followed him down the stairs. "There's enough." You might have heard about the wildfire on the news. It was a big one. There was speculation that it was caused by hikers or careless campers, but the real reason why the blaze started was never truly discovered. No one would have guessed it was set by 2 rogue park rangers and fire lookouts, no less. The forest fire spread and took out a lot of homes, but everybody who lived in the area made it out alive. Thankfully, no one died. I don't know how I would have lived with myself if they had. I was fired from park ranger services after what had happened, as was Ross. With all the news coverage and social media outrage, somebody had to be blamed for what happened, and we were the most viable scapegoats, especially since we had been seen fleeing the area long before the blaze was ever reported. Our excuse was that the fire had started near the road, and that we had been down by the Jeep when we had noticed it. Believing our lives were in danger, we had fled from the area before being able to radio in to report the wildfire. Unfortunately, there's no way of really knowing if we killed those things, or if we destroyed the archway. Maybe it can't even be destroyed. Maybe those things can't be killed. It's been years since all of this happened. I'm terrified of the forest these days, and I stay out of the woods and away from nature entirely. I live in a big city far away from all that business. I work in a high-rise and live in an apartment building. And when people ask if I want to go camping, I say, no. People tell me that I'm strange. They talk about me behind my back. One thing that people find peculiar about me is that I never go swimming. I never take my shirt off. And I don't date or try to find a girlfriend, despite people trying to set me up. I don't want anybody to see the changes that have been happening, the arms that have fully sprouted from my abdomen and have a mind of their own. I try to tie them down to strap them down with duct tape so they can't move, but they always manage to free themselves. They're very crafty in that way, and they brought with them an unusual appetite. I found myself craving the most disturbing things that crawl and skitter in the subways and in the sewers, things that I have to chase and kill and rip flesh from bones with my bare teeth. It scares me to think about what I'm becoming, and part of me will always be terrified. A voice in my mind is screaming that this is wrong and that I need to get help. But another part of me is getting used to it. A primordial, alien part of me is starting to very much enjoy the hunt. It wasn't all that long ago when I worked as a park ranger in a fire tower. You would think that it would be an easy job. Well, you'd be wrong. Once I found a strange list of rules, it was all downhill from there. Suffice it to say that I was lucky to get out with my life while still being a free man. There was an investigation into the matter, and I was questioned several times by the police. But they didn't want to hear the truth of the story, that something strange and supernatural happened that night in that fire tower. Unfortunately, one of my fellow rangers wasn't so lucky, but that's another story. I never went back to that tower, ever. I searched for a few weeks before finding a new job. It was just in the nick of time because I hadn't worked as a park ranger long enough to make much money, and switching back and forth between peanut butter sandwiches and mac and cheese wasn't the best way to stave off starvation. But beggars can't be choosers. So I applied for this job and went into the office building in town for the interview. The first question that I asked was, "Does it have any strange rules?" The interviewer looked at me like I had just sprouted a second head. "Like what kind of rules?" she said. "I don't know, like don't answer the phone at a certain time of night, or if you see a glowing orb, look away for 30 seconds. Are you planning on seeing any glowing orbs inside of our warehouse?" she said hesitantly. "I hope not." She held my gaze for a long moment before answering my question. I started to wonder if she was going to kick me out of her office. To answer your original question, she said, I don't know of any strange rules for the warehouse. To my knowledge, it's a standard night watchman job. You go there, you make sure that nobody breaks in and takes anything, and you go home. Well, that's a relief. Just out of curiosity, why did you ask about the strange rules? My last job had some strange rules, and let's just say that it didn't end well. Oh, all right, she said. I suppose that would be a good question for you to ask then. The rest of the interview was standard stuff. Thankfully, I hadn't blown it and I got the job. She gave me my employee packet and the address of the warehouse. She told me that I would be trained on the job, when to be there for my first shift, and the name of my supervisor, Mr. Larson. I thanked her and went on my merry way, happy to have a job that was easy and paid decent. The next couple days went by slowly as anticipation built for my first shift. When I got in my car, the gas gauge told me that I would be pushing it to make it back and forth to work before I got my first paycheck. I drove to the address and I found it in what looked like an abandoned business park. There were other warehouses along the drive with weeds growing through the cracks in the pavement and up the sides of the buildings. There were streetlights, but they looked old and decrepit. Only 2 of them were still emanating their putrid yellow light, fighting a losing battle against the darkness. I came to the end of the road, and looming in front of me was a massive warehouse. The GPS on my phone told me that I had arrived, but I wasn't sure that I wanted to. It was all by itself, surrounded by woods on all sides except for the notch that had been cut out to make the road. I pulled around to the side where the main door was and was slightly comforted by the car that was parked in front. At least, there was some other living soul out here. I got out, taking my bag of supplies with me. I started toward the door and hit the remote button to lock the car out of habit. The horn's chirp echoed through the trees, making me even more aware of their presence. I was looking forward to doing security checks around the perimeter. There was only one security light that I had seen when I drove up, and it was near the entrance. I approached the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. I looked around for anything and I found a keypad. I opened up my email on my phone and I read the instructions that I had been sent. Your shift is from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m., it read. You cannot leave between those hours. The code for the keypad is your employee code. That way we know it's you inside. I paused. There was something about that last sentence that gave me chills. I reread it and decided that it was just a security thing. Your employee code is 2059. It should open any doors you need to access inside. If you have any problems, call or text the number included in your packet. I didn't remember getting any number in my packet, but maybe I just skimmed over it. I entered my code on the keypad. The light above the numbers turned to green and I heard the lock click. I pushed the door open and I stepped inside. When the door shut, I heard the lock click again. I stared at it as if the sound had some finality to it. Just out of curiosity, I typed in my code on the inside keypad, but the light stayed red and the door stayed locked. I tried to shrug it off, thinking that it was like a time card thing, that it wouldn't open again until 9 a.m. I looked at my watch and it read 9:02 p.m. I turned toward the inside set of doors and I punched in my code. The green light and click granted me entry. If I'm gonna have to type in my code at every door, it's gonna be a long night, I thought. I stepped into what looked like a small reception area. There was a desk and a couple of vinyl couches along the wall. It was sparsely decorated and dimly lit. The only painting I saw on the wall had a picture of a large gate that was dark red with words in some other language. I walked through the first set of doors after inputting my code. They opened up into a long, dimly lit hallway with doors on both sides. The first one that I came to said, "Security." It was no surprise when I saw a keypad on the door lock. I typed in my code and I opened the door. Inside, there was a desk with monitors and a computer. There was also a table with 2 chairs, another vinyl couch, a mini fridge, and a small bathroom. I set my bag down on the couch and got my water bottle out. I opened the fridge and found a lunchbox with a bottle on the door. I guess it belongs to the guard I'm supposed to relieve, I thought. Where is he anyway? I put my bottle in and I closed the fridge, and then looked around the room more closely. There were 3 doors on the far wall that I hadn't noticed. I opened the first one and found that it was a closet. A light jacket hung there and a small duffel bag sat on the shelf. I sat my bag beside it and I closed the door. I opened the second one to find a weapons locker. 2 handguns and 2 shotguns, along with tasers and pepper spray, were locked behind a metal mesh door. I tried the door out of curiosity, but it refused to budge. Surprisingly, there wasn't a keypad to punch in numbers. It was an actual lock. I looked around for the keys, but I didn't find them. Maybe the other guard had them. I closed the door and I tried to open the third one. It remained locked. Maybe it's a maintenance closet or something. I sat at the desk and I looked at the computer. The screen had a login screen. I typed in my code and it came up to an email. I had 3 messages. I clicked on the first one that read, "First, log in." I opened it and read, "Welcome to your first shift. I'm sure by now you have some questions. First off, you need to log into our Wi-Fi. If you look at your phone, you'll see there's no cell service inside the building." I looked and sure enough, my phone had no service. I followed the directions to hook up to their Wi-Fi. Once I was logged in, a strange symbol flashed on my phone and then it went blank for a whole minute. I tried to go back or go to the home screen, but nothing happened. I was about to power off when suddenly the screen came back on. Everything seemed normal and I was able to do everything but make phone calls. My phone dinged as I received a text. "Congratulations on setting up your phone on our corporate Wi-Fi. Calling will be disabled while you're on shift. If you have any needs, text this number. Someone is monitoring 24/7. I saw the number they sent and saved it as corporate. I opened the second email and read the message. "Your duties. Monitor for any unusual activity. If there is unusual activity, text corporate immediately. Check to make sure that all doors are secure. Do green patrols twice per shift. Do a red patrol once per shift. Do yellow patrols 4 times per shift." I was wondering what that meant when a video started showing the hallway floors that had different color stripes of paint. There was green, yellow, and red, and then there seemed to be another color beside them. Before I could make it out, the video ended. "Take your breaks only in the security room." The email ended. I looked at the subject for the third one and it read, "Open only after the first patrol." I hovered the arrow over the subject and was tempted to click, but just then I got a text. "Have you done your first patrol yet?" it read. Great, I thought. Just what I need is to be nagged at work. "Not yet," I texted back. "Better get to it." I sighed and stepped to the door when my phone dinged. "Don't forget your flashlight." I read it and looked at the closet, realizing that I had done just that. I slowly looked back at the phone, thinking many things that I would like to respond, but texted, "Thanks." I went to the closet and got my flashlight out of my bag. I looked at my phone and thought, anything else? Wondering if it would respond. Thankfully it didn't. My phone literally reading my thoughts would be disturbing beyond belief. I opened the door and glanced at my phone to see if I had done anything else wrong. It remained thankfully silent. I stepped back into the hallway where every third light was lit. I assumed it was the nighttime lighting, and I started down the hall looking at the floor. The lines were just like in the video. The fourth line was black. I paused at the ramifications of being guided toward something that they didn't want me to check on. That either meant that they didn't care about it or didn't trust me to check it. Either one was disconcerting. I decided to get a yellow patrol out of the way. I followed the line down the hall, glancing at each door that was marked with a letter and a number. The first one said A1. The next said A2. As I continued, the letter remained the same as the numbers increased. Odd numbers on the right side doors and even on the left. I reached the end of the hall and the yellow and green lines turned right down another hall. The red and black went left. I glanced left but stayed right. My curiosity would have to wait until later. I followed the lines down the next hall and read the first door. It said B1. This continued down the entire hall just like the first. At the end, the green line turned left while the yellow went right. This hall started with C1. The entire time that I had been walking there was total silence. There wasn't the sound of air conditioners or anything. It was eerie. I stopped and looked around. The hallway and all the doors were pristine. There wasn't a bit of dirt. It didn't look like a warehouse, at least not like I thought the inside of a warehouse would look. This was something else. I would have to make a list of questions to ask when I got back to the security room. I continued my round and followed the yellow line as it turned right again. This hall started with D1. When I reached the end of the hall, the line dead-ended at the door. I hesitated for a moment before opening it into another hall. I turned and looked at the other side of the door. It said A1. I looked to the left and I saw the security room. The yellow line had taken me in a circle, or I suppose it would be a square. I shook my head and stepped into the security room and sat down at the computer. The email sat waiting. I clicked it. Congratulations on your first successful patrol. I read the sentence and felt uneasy at the word successful. Why wouldn't it be successful? I thought. By now you probably have some questions. Perhaps we can answer them before you ask. First, the black line. Do not follow it under any circumstances. Second, as I'm sure you've already noticed, you cannot leave until your shift is over. Third, make sure you close any door that you open. These are some basic rules. There will be more as your shift commences. I looked for many more emails, but there were none. Great, I thought. More rules. At least these ones aren't all weird and creepy. I opened the mini fridge and took a drink from my water bottle. As I put it back, I glanced at the lunchbox and wondered where the other guard was. I checked my watch and it was almost 10. I figured I should do my first green line patrol. I went back out into the hallway and followed the green line to the point where it veered away from the yellow. The silence in the hall was starting to bother me. Listening to my own footsteps was unnerving. The green line led to another similar corridor. This one was E Hall. I was starting to wonder just how big this place was when I heard a sound that I didn't make. I slowly turned and looked back to find an open door. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt it wasn't open when I went past it. I shone my flashlight around looking for anything and anyone, but nothing was there. I approached the door and was about to close it and resume my patrol when I heard the sound again. My hand hovered over the knob as my curiosity overwhelmed my fear and common sense. Instead of shutting the door and moving on, I opened it enough to look inside. The room was dark. I considered turning on the light but instead opted to use my flashlight. I shone it around the room that looked like a lab, with plenty of workstations. I did a slow lap around the room, looking for anything out of the ordinary, which was laughable because I had no idea what went on in this room or this building on a day-to-day basis. So how would I know what was normal for this place? In the middle of my lap, I noticed a dim light underneath a door at the far end of the room. I slowly approached it, turned the knob, and peeked inside. I wish I wouldn't. There was a large glowing glass container that held an entity is the only thing that I could think to call it. I know that if I called it what I think it should be called, that I'll go insane on the spot. It was easily the size of a large human and then some. It was black and covered in with what I could only describe as scales. There were sharp points sticking on its elbows, knees, and seemingly random spots along its head and torso. Its face was a nightmare, with horns sticking out of its forehead and curling up like a ram's. It was hovering inside the container somehow, even though there was no liquid inside of it, and holding its legs, making it look like it was curled up in the fetal position. I kept the flashlight down so as to not risk disturbing the thing. I panned around the room. There seemed to be controls of some sort near the container that were making occasional hissing sounds. It was as if the machine was breathing for it. How I kept from screaming and running out of the room, I don't know. Through some miracle, I kept it together and slowly backed away. I held the doorknob, turned, and then slowly released it once the door was closed. I breathed a sigh of relief and started toward the door that led to the hallway. I was almost there when I heard the soft scuffle of a foot on the floor. I froze and turned back to the room, panning slowly with my light. At first, I didn't see anything, and then a tiny pale hand reached up and turned the knob that led into the monster's room. I didn't want to know what was doing it, I just wanted it to stop. After a quick rundown of potential outcomes, I settled on getting out of that room as quietly as possible. I stepped toward the hallway door while shooting furtive glances back at the other door that was slowly opening. I could see the creature in its container and the thing that had opened the door. It was small, only a few feet tall, with gangly legs and arms, but what froze my blood was seeing its face. It was embedded in its torso. 2 eyes and a mouth full of sharp, gritting teeth were right where its belly should have been. It had no head. It was like somebody had smashed all but a few inches of this creature's torso and left the face there. It looked at me and its horrific smile grew as it reached the controls in the room. I backed out into the hallway and closed the door quietly, and then ran as I followed the green line to its ending underneath the door. I hesitated to open the door with my new knowledge that there were potentially dangerous creatures lurking behind every door. Finally, I turned the knob and I peeked out into a hallway. The first thing I saw was 4 lines on the floor, which told me that I was once again in the first hall. I looked at the number on the door. It read A2. I jumped out and slammed the door shut, diving into the security room and shutting that door as well. I leaned against it for a long time, wondering how I was going to do another patrol, knowing that either or both of those creatures could be stalking the hallways. My attention was grabbed by one of the monitors. There were over a dozen images being transmitted onto different sections of a large TV. I looked at the videos for the first time and noticed that there wasn't a single camera aimed at the outside of the building. They were all inside. My breath caught in my throat. That means they aren't afraid of what's outside, but what's inside. I watched the monitors. Fortunately, they were in color. I focused on the cameras that showed green lines on the floor and waited to see if any of the doors opened. After 30 minutes, I hadn't seen any movement. I sat back in my chair feeling a little bit better. I decided to do another yellow patrol. I didn't want to. I would have rather stayed in the security room for the rest of my shift, but that wasn't an option. I comforted myself with the thought that I had been watching the cameras and nothing had moved. It wasn't too much comfort. I picked up my flashlight, trying to keep it steady as my shaking hands showed my hesitation. I stepped through the security room door and out into the hallway. Somehow it looked different now. Before, when I was just checking a bunch of doors, I convinced myself that nothing of interest was in any of the rooms. But now I knew better. Now I looked at each room as if it were about to spring open, and I shook the thoughts away. I had to, or I wouldn't take another step. I walked down the first hall, ears attuned to any sound. At my first turn, all I heard were my own footsteps. Even they gave me pause and had me whipping around to look behind me from time to time. By the second turn, I was beginning to feel a little less nervous. By the third turn, I was almost calm, until I saw where the green line split off from the yellow. I stopped and stared down the green hall, wondering if that thing had slipped out. For an instant, I thought that I saw movement. I shone my light all around but saw nothing. Even so, I picked up the pace for my last hallway and quickly opened the security room door and then closed it, feeling my heart racing. I looked at my watch and it was nearly midnight. I had done 3 of my 7 patrols. My phone dinged. There was a text. "It's nearly midnight," it said. I wanted to reply sarcastically but thought better of it. What's special about midnight? Didn't they tell you? Well, tell me what. The rules. My heart hammered in my chest. Not again. They told me that I couldn't leave before my shift was over and to do the different color patrols. That's not the rules I'm talking about. I knew it before the text came. Do I want to know what they are? I texted. You need to. What if I just sit in the security room? There wasn't an immediate text back. There are things that would happen. Well, like what? Like things that would destroy you or at least your mind. I sighed. So send me the list of rules. I shook my head in disbelief that I was doing this crap again. Rule number 1. At midnight, you must be in the security office and stay there until 12:30 a.m. No matter what you see or hear, you must stay in the office and don't open the door for any reason. That doesn't sound ominous at all, I texted. Rule number 2. When doing a patrol, if you hear someone calling to you or screaming, ignore it. Do not attempt to find the source of the sound. Rule number 3. If the doors start changing, follow the lines back to the security room. That should actually take care of you for now. Just remember, do not follow the black line and do not go into any of the rooms. Are you kidding me with this? I texted. I don't want to do this again. Let me out. Sorry, not possible. Nothing can open those doors until your shift is over. And what do you mean again? I worked in a fire tower with weird rules. Interesting. I would like to hear that story someday. Good luck. Yeah, thanks a lot. By the way, where's the key to the weapons locker? You know, just in case. Didn't the guard you relieved give it to you? I haven't seen him. That's not good news. Is there a spare key somewhere? No return text came. Hello, is there a spare key? No response. I checked my watch and it was 12:01. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. I took a step towards it before I remembered the rules that I had been texted. The knocking became more insistent. Next, the doorknob began rattling as if somebody was trying to tear it off the door. Who's there? I said, cringing at my own words. The doorknob stopped rattling. There was a silence that was only broken by the pounding of my heartbeat. It's Mr. Larson, a voice said. "I've misplaced my key. Could you let me in?" I took another step and I reached for the doorknob when I remembered. "There's a keypad on the door," I said. "If you are who you say you are, just punch in your code and the door will open." There was silence on the other side of the door. It lasted so long that I wondered if whoever it was had gone away. I leaned against the door and put my ear up to it. And that's when I heard the loudest, most blood-curdling inhuman scream that I had ever heard in my life. I threw myself on the floor trying to get away from the door as quickly as possible. The pounding continued. I wondered how long the door would hold up and what I would do when whatever it was broke it down. I held my flashlight like a baseball bat, looking all around the room for a better weapon and not finding any. My eyes fell on the weapons locker, wishing that I had the key. The door started bowing inward with every blow. It was so bad that I got one of the chairs from the break table and wedged it against the doorknob. I stepped back and looked at my handiwork. The ludicrousness of a folding metal chair trying to hold off an assault that was bowing a solid door was enough to make me laugh. I knew that it wouldn't be lasting long. Sawdust was raining down on the floor. I considered locking myself in the bathroom, but I saved that for a last resort. And then suddenly the assault stopped. The last few remnants of sawdust floated to the floor in silence. I gripped the flashlight tighter, not trusting this respite. Sweat dripped from my forehead as I waited for the assault to resume. Nothing happened. I stood there staring at the door dumbfounded, not knowing what to do next. I glanced at my watch and it said 12:32 a.m. The text said stay in the office from 12 to 12:30. I thought, maybe it's okay to go out now. I grabbed the doorknob and slowly turned, taking a deep cleansing breath before pulling it open. I'm not sure what I expected to be there, but what I found was nothing. The hallway looked the same way that it had before. No, wait, the lines on the floor. They were wrong. Every other time I came out of the security office, the lines stretched down the hallway to the right. Now they were going left. I looked to the right and saw the doors that went to the reception area, and eventually the outside doors. This is impossible, I thought, my breathing becoming erratic with panic. I pulled out my phone and texted, "The lines are reversed." It took a moment for the response. "Did you break any rules?" "No, I did everything the way you said. Somebody was trying to beat down the office door, but I didn't open it." "Have you gone in any rooms?" "No, wait. On my second round, I found an open door and went inside to check it." "Not good. What did you see?" "Nothing," I lied. "Are you sure?" "I didn't see anything but an empty room." "Well, then why are the lines switched?" "I have no idea. You're the one who's supposed to know this stuff." "Okay, do a yellow line patrol. When you get to the end, instead of going through the door the line ends at, open the first door on your right and go through it. And that'll fix things. Hopefully." "What do you mean, hopefully?" No return text came. "Come on, man, you've got to be kidding me with this." I texted, but still got no response. I looked left and then right and then back at the security room. I sighed and turned left down the hallway, following the lines. It was shortly after my first turn that I noticed a difference. The place was still silent except for my footsteps, but something felt off. It was like I was in a different place, but it looked the same. It was almost like I was walking through a replica of the warehouse, but different. Aside from the fact that I was going in the opposite direction, which defied the laws of physics because this hallway didn't exist, there was something else. I found out what it was when I stopped, but my footsteps kept going. I stood there halfway down the hall, listening to my footsteps continue on without me. I looked down and my shoes were still on my feet, so that was some comfort. I stomped my shoe on the floor, but to my surprise it made no sound. I stared at my shoes as my footsteps rounded the corner and faded. I rushed to catch up, but the sound was gone. I looked down the dimly lit hall before me and saw nothing. My nerves were getting a workout as I resumed my patrol in total silence. My shoes no longer made any sound. I tried stomping again, but nothing happened. When I turned the next corner, I was greeted by the worst sight imaginable. The little thing that had been in the room of my green patrol was standing in the middle of the hall staring at me and smiling that disturbing grin on its belly. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind him was the black scaly creature from the glowing container. It stood at least 8 feet high and was breathing smoke. It looked at me and extended wings that I didn't know it had. They reached both walls easily. It also was smiling. Neither smile was comforting. I found my feet rooted to the floor and my knees shaking. The smaller creature made a chittering sound as it started toward me, and the larger took its first step. Its foot landed with the force of a jackhammer. The sound was debilitating. I covered my ears as they approached. I turned to run back to where I came from, but somehow impossibly, the same creatures were approaching from that hallway. I glanced back and forth at the mirror images of the unearthly threats closing in on me from both sides. I had no choice. I dove into the nearest door and slammed it shut. The pounding began right away. I backed away, but my foot stepped into empty air. I turned to find that I was at the top step of a stairway, but only for a moment. Gravity took over and I tumbled down the stairs. Fortunately, there was a landing that kept me from falling the rest of the way. I slowly stood and made sure of my balance while looking around at my new environment. The stairs that I had fallen down looked like concrete and had no railings. I glanced over the side at the darkness that seemed to go on forever. It reminded me of the Moria mine staircase in Lord of the Rings. I looked up at the stairs at the door that was still under attack, and then looked down the stairs that disappeared into the darkness. Looking around the room, I saw no other option. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had to go in a room, sorry, I texted. No response. Oh, come on, don't be like that. Answer me. Nothing. I looked at the phone and it showed that I had no Wi-Fi signal. Great, I said, hearing the word echo back to me. I sighed and started down the stairs. Fortunately, there was a landing every 30 steps or so. Each landing started the next set of stairs in a different direction. Looking down through the middle of the staircase, I could see them disappear in an elongated square. After a few landings, I found myself thinking the strangest thought. What about the rest of my rounds? The unending stairs didn't answer. As I continued down my squared circle, I found myself getting tired. More than once I stumbled and nearly rolled down the stairs, only catching myself in the nick of time to avoid falling into the abyss. I had been walking for what felt like hours. I checked my watch and it said 2:22 a.m. I was tired and thirsty. I sat down on a step above a landing and contemplated my non-existent options. I could keep going. I leaned over and looked down at the continuing endless stairs. I could go back. I looked up at these seemingly endless stairs above me, knowing the creatures were somewhere up there waiting. I wondered if I would be fired for not doing my patrols and if I truly cared. My first hunger pang ripped through my stomach. I know, I said, looking at my belly. And the food's somewhere up there. I pointed in some random upward direction, having no idea where the security office was. Out of sheer boredom, I glanced at my now useless phone. For an instant, the Wi-Fi signal showed up and then disappeared. A bolt of hope shot through me. I texted. I got chased into a room by some creatures. I clicked send and waited. The signal stayed dead. I got a beep saying that there was a text and excitedly read it, only to find that it was the failed to send notification. I tried again with the same results. Over and over I kept trying to send. It was my only option other than continuing down the endless stairway. My phone dinged again, and I prepared to hit resend when a message showed up. It said, "We'll deal with the consequences later. Describe the room to me." I was so overjoyed that I kept misspelling words. Dark room and the stairway. It took 5 tries for it to send, and it was a few minutes until the response got through. "Okay, do nothing. Set your phone down and lay perfectly still for 5 minutes." I didn't bother to try repeating sending. Okay. I lay on the platform, set my phone beside me, and closed my eyes. I counted out 5 minutes very slowly just to be sure that I didn't end early. When I opened them, I gasped. I was laying on the floor in the middle of a square room. The pattern on the floor looked like the endless staircase. I stood and walked over to the door. I reached for the doorknob and opened the door slowly. The hallway appeared to be empty. I stepped tentatively out into the hall and started back, following the yellow line. I hoped I was going in the right direction. At the end of the hall, the line turned left. The green line separated off to the right, and I stayed with the yellow. One more turn and the yellow line dead-ended at the door. I reached for the doorknob, but then remembered and turned to the right, opening that door. I peeked through and saw the security across the hall, lunged for it, and dove back into the relative safety of the office. I went straight to the fridge and grabbed my water bottle, then opened the closet and pulled out my sandwich. I lay on the couch and chugged half the bottle while inhaling my sandwich. It wasn't long until I was asleep. I woke to the sound of my phone dinging and I read the text. "Are you still with us?" "Yes, thanks to you," I texted. "Take a break before you do any more patrols. I'm way ahead of you. And don't break any more rules. I'll do my best, trust me. A couple more rules. Really? If you see any more creatures, don't go in a room. Stand on the line and be still. As long as you're on the line, you'll survive." "Well, can they hurt me?" "Next rule." "Yes?" The next text didn't come. I set down my phone and set a timer for an hour. I thought that he would text the rest by then. I woke an hour later to my phone's alarm, but no message. I tried again and waited, but got no response. What do I do now? I look at my watch and it said 3:47 a.m. "Okay, let's evaluate," I said, sitting at the desk in front of the cameras and computer. "I have a little over 5 hours left until I can leave this madhouse. I've done 1 green patrol and 3 yellows. So I have 1 each of red, yellow, and green to do yet. There's some kind of monstrous creature roaming the hallways with his deformed sidekick, and I still don't know where the other guard and the keys to the weapons locker are. The laws of reality seem to be subjective and depend greatly on whether or not I open any doors on my patrol, somehow. I decided to do another patrol. I was more worried that the building itself wouldn't let me out on time if I didn't do all my patrols. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if that was what had happened to the guard that I was supposed to relieve. If he was sitting on some endless staircase trapped forever because he had missed 1 patrol. It wasn't a comforting thought. At this point, it was all that kept me from laying on the couch and sleeping the rest of my shift away. I took another drink and I went to the bathroom, then stuck my phone in my pocket and grabbed my flashlight and headed out the door. When I looked down, I was surprised to see the lines going to the right. Maybe I reset things when I reset the room, I thought. I headed down the hallway, hearing my footsteps once again. I stopped and the sound of my footsteps stopped as well. It was a comforting return to some normalcy. As I made the first turn, I paused and peeked around the corner to see if any creatures were waiting for me. The hallway seemed empty. I looked at the doors to make sure that none were cracked open, waiting for me to pass. They all seemed closed. I was glad that I hadn't run across the creatures, but every step I took made me wonder if they were lying in wait for me at the next turn, silently waiting to jump out and do unspeakable things. I glanced down at the lines where the red and black went left and the green and yellow went right. There was something on the floor. I bent down and shone my flashlight to get a closer look. There was a small drop of something red. I touched it with my finger and it smeared on the floor. Whatever it wasn't dry yet. It hadn't been here long. I brought my finger up to my nose and I smelled it. It had a metallic smell. My eyes went wide with the realization. It was blood. I jumped up and looked all around, searching the floor for where it came from. The yellow and green hallway looked clean, but the red and black hallway. I saw another drop 3 feet down the hall. I shone my flashlight at the yellow and green, longing to do a quiet patrol. And then I looked over at the red and black lines that were punctuated with drops of blood every few feet. I sighed and turned left, following the blood in the foreboding red and black lines. My senses went on high alert. I could hear my breathing, I could smell my perspiration as my stress level rose. Every step sounded louder than the one before. Even the doors seemed somehow menacing. When I saw a light in the ceiling flicker, I froze. Nothing jumped out of a room and dragged me to below. I paused and took a deep, cleansing breath, then continued my patrol, keeping an eye on the blood on the floor. I came to another turn and checked carefully before stepping into the new hallway. The problem was, it was a fork. The red line went right and the black line went left. The problem was, the blood followed the black line. I thought back to the repeated warnings not to follow the black line. I remembered being trapped for hours when I disobeyed a rule and went into a room. I stood there at the fork, looking at each line in turn back and forth. It came down to a choice. Obey the rules, follow the red line and play it safe. Disobey the rules, follow the blood and see if the other guard is hurt. One choice was selfless, the other was selfish. Another thought pushed to the front of the line. I've already broken the rules. True, I was trapped in the stairway for a while and wasn't sure if I would make it out, but I did. This thought tipped the scales and I stepped off the red line and onto the black one. The moment that I did, I felt a chill. I looked around, but nothing else seemed different. I kept following the trail of blood when the hall got darker. I looked up and every third light was still lit. It was like something was snuffing out the light. The chills got more intense to the point where I could see my breath. The doors in this hall were fewer and farther apart and there were no turns. I looked at the doors to try to figure out how far I had gone when I noticed that they were blank. I shone my light at half a dozen doors and not one of them had a letter, number, or any markings on it. I decided my selflessness had reached its limit. I turned and started back towards the fork where the red line was. I watched for 5 minutes and the red line was still nowhere in sight. In fact, the chill hadn't gone away either. The drops of blood were still there though. I broke into a light jog for a few minutes, which soon became a flat-out run. After a few minutes, I stopped to catch my breath. That's impossible, I thought, realizing even as I thought it that I had already seen impossible things tonight. Once I was breathing normally again, I decided to break out of this loop. I reached for one of the doors, but it was locked. I tried another and another, but they were all locked. I pulled up my phone and texted, "I'm stuck again." "We told you not to follow the black line," the return message said. It sent chills down my spine. How did you know that I was following the black line? I only said that I was in trouble. "We know exactly what you've been doing the entire time you've been in the building." "Then why didn't you tell me not to follow the black line?" "Oh, we did, but you ignored it." "So what do I do now?" A single word came back, making me wish I had never come to this place. Die. As I was still staring at the 3 horrid letters on my phone, I heard a noise from behind me. It was just the shuffle of a foot, and I knew I wasn't the one moving. I looked up and there stood the hideous creature with no head and its face on its belly. It was staring at me and grinning. I turned to escape the other way, but the massively scaly creature was standing there blocking my path. They had me boxed in and none of the doors would open. I was out of options. The only thing that I could think of was the text that told me to stay on the line. I stepped away from the door and out to the middle of the hallway and stood on the black line. As they approached, I could see smiles on each of their grotesque faces. The big one was flexing its claws and the small one's arms were outstretched, as if wanting to give me a hug. But I knew better. They had me and they knew it. With nothing to lose, I ran towards the smaller one, and right before I got to him, I swung my flashlight with everything that I had. It smacked him right in the teeth. I dove over his falling body as he crumpled to the floor. I kept running as hope sprung up in my chest and fueled my escape. It was short-lived as I heard massive wings flapping behind me, and the next thing I knew, claws grabbed my shoulders, tearing through my uniform and into my sides. I tried to escape its grasp, but its grip was like iron. I stumbled and fell to the floor with the weight of that thing landing on top of me. I felt and heard pops in my back as pain raced down my spine. It matched the pain in my face as my skull bounced off the concrete floor on impact. I knew instantly that my nose was broken. It released its grasp so its claws could stand on the floor, but it still kept me pinned down. I heard it cackling as it relished in my helplessness. I felt hot liquid run down my back that I hoped wasn't my blood. I tried to break free and squirm my way out of its grip, but it was too strong and all I ended up doing was causing myself more pain. I felt its claws tearing at my back, ripping cloth and skin. There was nothing that I could do. It was digging into my spine. Once there, I was just a piece of meat. Whoever had texted me was right. I was about to die. The rules had finally been my undoing. There was a flash of light and an explosion from behind me. I felt the pressure release as the creature's weight lifted off of me. I wondered at this new development, feeling grateful but cautious, as I painfully rolled to my side and attempted to get up. I got as far as my knees when I felt more than heard a presence. I looked and there stood a man with a uniform on similar to mine, only not as destroyed. He was older than me and looked like he had been through a rough time as well. He had some scratches on his cheek and his uniform was ripped in several places. He also had a bandage on his hand that was red and dripping. I tried to get to my feet but struggled. He helped me up and we stared at each other for a moment. "Mr. Larson, I presume," I said finally. He looked surprised when I said his name. "Do I know you?" "I'm your new trainee. I just started tonight." "What are you doing out here on the black line?" "Well, I saw the blood and followed it to make sure somebody was alright." He looked at his hand. "Yeah, got into a bit of a scrap. We should probably head back before Ugly decides to show up again." "I agree," I said, starting to walk away, but my left leg didn't want to cooperate. I started to fall, but he caught me. "You all right there, son?" "My leg seems to be having a bit of a problem." He grabbed my arm and pulled it over his shoulder. "Let's get you back to the security office and take a look at that back." We started back down the hall and within a few minutes came to the fork where the red line split off. I was never so glad to see anything in my life as that line of paint on the floor. We started to turn back towards the yellow and green lines, but I stopped. "Do you mind if we do a red line patrol?" I said. He looked at me puzzled. "I'd rather have somebody with me anyways, and we do have to go all the way back." "Yeah, sure thing, kid," he said. We kept going straight on the red line, and the farther we went, the more my back seemed to hurt. "Do you mind if I ask you some questions?" I said to keep my mind off the pain. "Shoot." "What is this place?" "Well now, you asked one heck of a question to start with." It's hard to explain. Let's just say it's a form of a texting facility. Testing what? He seemed to struggle with that for a moment and was silent as we walked. Well, testing all sorts of things. Obviously, you've seen some of the more incredible subjects, but there are also simpler tests going on. Like what? Mostly dealing with reactions, how different subjects deal with stimuli. How do you know so much about this place? He chuckled. When you've been here as long as I have, you learn a few things. Just then, a door burst open and 3 ugly troll-looking creatures lumbered towards us. He stopped and tapped his watch, then fiddled with controls for a moment as the trolls advanced on us. Suddenly, there was a wave of light and they froze in place right as they were reaching for us. I looked from him to the trolls and back. That's a handy gadget you have, I said. When do I get one of those? He smiled. Can you keep a secret? Sure. I'm technically not supposed to have it, but I find it makes patrols a lot easier. Nice. Maybe I could borrow it once in a while. If you don't quit after tonight. That's a mighty big if, I said, feeling the pain getting worse. We continued past the frozen trolls until the red line dead-ended at the door. I reached for it, but he pulled me back. I'm guessing you didn't get all the rules yet. Yeah, apparently not. He touched his watch and a light shone from it onto the door. It had a red X on it. He shone it on the door beside it, and it also shone with a red X. The third door showed a green circle. This one, he said, opening the door and helping me through it. To my surprise, we came out in the main hallway. I looked at the number on the door and it said A5. We walked down to the security room and I reached for the number pad to enter my code. I stopped and withdrew my hand. Why don't you enter your code? I said. What, because I'm holding you up so you don't collapse? I painfully reached over and leaned against the wall. I'm good, go ahead. He looked for a long moment. This isn't a very polite way to treat somebody who helped you out. No, it isn't, but I would still like to see you enter your code. He glared at me with a fiery intensity. Is this the way you're going to treat your superiors? Not if they really are my superiors. What are you saying? I'm saying that I would like to see you punch in your employee code to show me if you're really who you say you are. Well, who else would I be? I don't know, let's find out. He stood there looking every bit like he wanted to deck me, and then suddenly his expression softened. Good job, kid, he said, and then faded to nothingness. I let out a breath I didn't realize that I had been holding in, punched in my code. The door opened and I found myself once again looking at this room as my place of refuge. I limped into the bathroom and painfully peeled off what was left of my shirt. I wetted some paper towel and tried to pat down the gouges and scrapes on my back. I looked in the mirror at my broken nose and patted it with wet paper towel to get as much of the dried blood off as possible. I wasn't looking forward to getting it set, if I ever got out of here alive. As I stepped out of the bathroom, something was different about the room. The weapons locker was open and I stepped over to it and found the metal door hanging open. There was a shotgun and a handgun missing. I didn't want to think about the ramifications of somebody being in what should have been the most secure room in the building. Not only that, but taking weapons, and the fact that they thought there was enough danger to need the weapons. I'll admit that it would have been nice to have the shotgun on the last patrol, but I grabbed a shotgun and loaded it, then threw some extra rounds in my pant pocket. And then I took a holster and put it on my belt, loading a handgun to put in it. I grabbed a taser and pepper spray as well. It was strange being armed, but it didn't make me feel more secure. Maybe it was the fact that I had no idea who had the other guns. I hoped it was my supervisor, but this place had taught me to expect the unexpected. The other difference in the room was the locked door that I had assumed was a maintenance closet. Well, it was open. I chambered around in the shotgun and peeked around the corner into the open door. It was dark. I was tempted to close the door and walk away, but my curiosity wouldn't let me. I turned on the shotgun's flashlight and started through the door. I jumped as my phone dinged, saying that I had a text. "Don't go in that room," it read. I stuck the phone in my pocket and continued into the room. The light wasn't much help against the total darkness. I could only see a few feet in front of me. The passageway was cramped. I had to walk a little sideways. Claustrophobia crept up on me and had me fighting off panic as I continued down the tiny corridor. The light from the shotgun didn't do much to stave off the darkness. There was little to see, but it would have been nicer to see it much more brightly. Suddenly the corridor opened up into a large room. I made sure there weren't steps to stumble down like before. I flashed the light around but didn't see much. The room was empty except for something small in the far corner. I cautiously started towards it, shooting glances all around as I went. When I got close, I could see it was a small box. There were bars on the front of the small door and fingers were sticking out. "Hello?" said a raspy voice, barely loud enough to hear. "Who are you?" I said. "My name's Kevin Larson. Who are you and why aren't you wearing a shirt?" I looked down and sure enough, I forgot to put my shirt back on when I was tending to my wounds. "That's not important. I need to get you out of here." "You can't. They're waiting for someone to rescue me so they can capture them. I'm nothing more than bait." And I fell for it. I said, looking at the lock that prevented his escape. "Go back and report that I'm missing. I did that several hours ago, and they haven't sent anyone. Unless they're invisible, which for this place that might not be much of a stretch." "Who are you again?" "I started last night. I'm your new trainee." "You said you started last night?" "Yes." "And you called and that I was missing?" "Yes." "You're not my trainee, you're my replacement." "What do you mean?" "If they haven't come looking for me yet, that means they think I'm gone." Wow, talk about job security. I kept fiddling with the lock, but it refused to open. "Step back," I said. "What are you doing?" I fired the shotgun at the lock. It hit, but it didn't break it. "Stop!" he yelled as I chambered and fired another round. This time, the lock broke and came free. I opened the door in time to receive a punch to the jaw. "You idiot! You could have killed him!" He came out of the box and wrapped his hands around my neck. "Get off me!" I yelled, twisting out of his grasp. He knocked me to the floor and we rolled around trading punches. "You're welcome," I said. "For what? Trying to give me a buckshot milkshake?" I stopped rolling when I heard the sound. It was like a rushing wind coming towards us. "What is that?" I said. He jumped up and ran toward the corridor. "What is it?" I said to his rapidly disappearing back as I ran as best as I could behind him. It didn't take long for me to find out. The large creature that I had met last in the black hallway must have a lot of family because they were all flying toward me. I kicked into high adrenaline gear, running faster than my injured body wanted to. The wave of black wings was almost on me. I turned around long enough to fire a shot at the closest one. I was rewarded by seeing him not only fall but take a couple of his brothers with him. Encouraged, I fired again, watching 3 more go down. I fired again and again, feeling like I could take them on as I squeezed into the corridor. I aimed one more time, but the gun only clicked. I had fired my last shot and needed to reload. The problem was I was running backward in a corridor that had no room and my arms were nearly pinned to my sides. I started hacking at them with the butt of the gun when they got close enough. It wasn't as effective as a buckshot blast, but it still worked. They were almost on me. I felt claws scratch at my head and face. Suddenly, I fell backward onto the floor of the security room. "Help me," Larson said as he tried to slam the door shut. I had the wind knocked out of me. I stumbled to get up and rolled over to press my weight against the door. They were still holding it open enough that it wouldn't latch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a shotgun shell. I loaded it and stuck the barrel in the opening. Before I could do anything, it was nearly ripped out of my hands, but by some miracle my finger was already on the trigger. It went off, knocking him back just enough to close the door. He collapsed beside me, breathing hard, and offered his hand. "Now I'll thank you for the rescue." "You're welcome," I said, sitting there trying to catch my breath. "Not to sound ungrateful, but how did you get in there anyway?" I pointed my thumb over my shoulder. The door was open. He fixed a hard stare at me. "That's impossible." I shrugged. "Don't know what to tell you. I walked in after my last patrol and the door was open, and the weapons locker was open." "Was anything missing?" he said, suddenly alarmed. "A shotgun and a handgun." He grabbed my arm and yanked me. "We have to go right now." "Why?" The word was barely out of my mouth when the floor erupted beside me. I jumped up and followed him toward the door. A shotgun blast hit the wall behind me. A chunk of the door blasted out in front of us just before we reached it, causing us to duck. "Who's doing that?" I said. "Oh, come on," a voice said from the other side of the room. "You've forgotten your rescuer already." I glanced around the corner and saw the fake Larson aiming a shot at my head. I ducked back just in time as the blast tore a hole in the wall. "Does this kind of thing happen often on the night shift?" I said, loading more shells into my shotgun. "Only when you break the rules," he said, fixing me with a pointed glare. "If I would have known this place had all these freaky rules, I never would have taken the job." "Neither would anyone else," he said, peeking around the corner and being rewarded with a shotgun blast, nearly hitting him in the face. "I don't get it," I said. "All these rules are stupid." "Maybe we could discuss this when we're safe." I fired off a blast when I saw the fake Larson peek around the corner. "And when will that be?" I shouted over the return shot. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for something. He grabbed the shotgun from me and fired. The buckshot pierced the fire extinguisher, instantly filling the room in a cloud of white powder. He grabbed me and dragged me toward the door as the other Larson fired blindly. We fell into the hallway, barely staying upright, coughing powder out of our lungs. I turned and slammed the door shut. "Will that hold him?" I said. "How many more patrols do you have to do?" He said, looking at his watch. "Are you nuts? Why would I do any more patrols with that psycho running around?" "Believe me," he said, looking me in the eyes, "there are worse things than him in this place." I thought for a moment. "I still need to do one yellow and one green. Do you have any more shells for this thing?" I felt in my pocket and pulled out 2 more shotgun shells, and then handed them over. I took out the handgun and chambered around, and then turned on the safety. "Let's go," he said, heading down the hall. I was still shirtless and feeling the effects of the attack in the black hall, but I did my best to hide the pain and let adrenaline carry me along. We walked side by side, each alert for anything that might pop out at us. Surprisingly, we made it all the way through a yellow patrol without a problem. I looked at my watch as we emerged back into the main hall near the security room. 8:11, I said. "We better get that last patrol in quick." The first hallway was no problem. When we turned the corner, however, my large, scaly friend made an appearance. I didn't even hesitate. I shot him in the torso and then in the head. He screamed an inhuman shriek and then ran the other way. His little buddy took one look at me, pointing the gun at him, and followed suit. Larson grinned and nodded at me. When he turned the second corner, I couldn't believe my eyes. The floor was suddenly made of lava. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "Okay, I know it looks bad, but stay single file and whatever you do, stay on the line." He started walking, keeping his feet on the line like a tightrope walker. I followed after him. The heat from the floor was tremendous. I was sweating buckets and I didn't even want to think about the consequences of toppling over without a shirt on. We continued as quickly as possible, looking every bit like two kids trying to walk the yellow curb on a sidewalk. Right in the middle, I stumbled and I lost my balance. I stepped one foot into the lava to regain my balance and was instantly rewarded with pain. I screamed in shock and agony. It felt like my foot was literally on fire. I got it back on the line, sucking wind through my teeth, trying to stay on the line, limping with one foot. "You okay?" Larson said. "Define okay. I'm in some madhouse, not a warehouse, with demons and ghostly employees chasing me, and I literally just burned my foot on lava." "I know it's a lot to process," he said, "but we need to keep going. Focus on the job and save going crazy for later." I took a deep breath and immediately began coughing from the fumes. I hopped along, staying on the line as best I could. I was ecstatic when we turned the corner and left the lava behind. I nearly ran over Larson, who had stopped and was staring down the hallway. I was about to ask why he had stopped when I saw for myself. At the end of the hall stood his doppelganger, and he wasn't alone. There were 5 of them. "What do we do?" I said quietly in his ear. He jumped at the sound of my voice so close. I don't know." I looked at my watch and it said 8:51. "We only have 9 minutes," I said. "Just go straight at them." I ran ahead as fast as I could hobble. They came at me in a crowd. I fired and hit the first one in the knee, taking him out of the fight. I fired again, hitting another in the shoulder and then hitting one in his knee. Faux Larson had fired his shotgun at me and thankfully missed. Although I did feel a burning in my leg. I would worry about that later. Another shot, another Larson down. I was nearly halfway when a shot hit me in the shoulder. It erupted in pain, but I kept going, shooting down the last of his twins. I fired a shot at Larson and somehow hit him in the chest. He was wobbly but still raised his shotgun and aimed at me. We were close enough now, I could tell that he would hit me. Suddenly a blast came from behind me. It passed so close that I could feel the heat from the buckshot. It hit him in the neck and he stumbled back. I added my last round in his chest before he could pull the trigger again. He collapsed in a heap, his hand reaching out towards us as we stumbled past, through the door and out into the main hall. I paused to catch my breath and leaned against the door, checking my watch. 8:58, I announced. We hobbled up to the reception door and stood silently like two people waiting for an elevator. The daytime staff began arriving and punching in through the door, throwing furtive looks our way as they entered. The last one was the security guard for the day. "What the heck happened to you two?" he said. We looked at each other and laughed as we punched in our numbers and walked out. He stood next to his car and I stood next to mine. "Will I see you at work tonight?" he said. "Absolutely no way," I said. He smiled and nodded. Understandable. He got in his car and drove away. I took an extra moment to look around at the building, which looked completely normal from the outside. I breathed the clean forest air and listened to the birds singing their merry, oblivious song. I got in my car slowly and gingerly, knowing that there was no way I could afford to go to the hospital. I hoped I had some gauze and antibiotic lotion at my dingy apartment. I started my car and hoped that I had enough gas to make it home. Driving away from that building was the best feeling. I started wondering if there was any place around here that didn't have some strange rules to protect their weird secrets. I knew that I would have to find a new job quickly. Maybe I could do fast food. There's no way anybody could have dark secrets in a burger joint, right?